And welcome to the Weekly Stuff Podcast with Jonathan Lack.
And Sean Chapman.
We are here to talk about stuff. This week on the show, we have a packed episode for our first episode back in 2 weeks. We have so many topics. Our main thing on today's show is going to be talking about Genshin Impact. The 3.0 update, which brought with it the entire new Sumeru region, is out. We're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about the new story, the new area, the new characters. It's going to be a lot of fun. We haven't done a Genshin Impact focused episode in a while, so we're both looking forward to that one. But that's not all. We're going to have an extra little Weekly Suit Gundam addendum at the end, talking about the newly released Mobile Suit Gundam The Witch from Mercury Prologue. The little I say little, it's a full 25-episode anime episode, or 25-minute episode of anime, Prologue to The Witch from Mercury. We're going to discuss that. I also want to talk about some recent big TV show launches, including House of the Dragon on HBO and The Lord of the Rings, The Rings of Power on Amazon. We've got some Halo news. It is a packed one. I am looking forward to it. We've got a lot of stuff to get to.
Yes, it's a lot of good stuff. For my side, I haven't been watching the TV show stuff. But Genshin Impact and Gundam, that's some good stuff.
Yes, we're gonna go back to how we used to talk about Game of Thrones, which is Jonathan talks about it a little bit on his own, and Sean thinks about eventually watching it.
Yeah, eventually maybe I'll watch all of it, and then we'll have a weird a midnight podcast where we break it all down.
Indeed. But Sean, how have you been doing? What have you been up to?
I've been working mostly. I've been working and playing Genshin Impact. That's why we didn't have an episode last week. Was the beginning of the semester is very busy, always, and so it just didn't make sense to try to force out an episode when I had a lot of other stuff going on. I will say that there was a policy that was in place for a very short amount of time at my job that meant that we had basically 2 of the 5 planning periods we had a week were dedicated to what are called PLCs if you're a teacher, which is like planning with your other groups or with other teachers, like teaching the same subject matter, which was too much. And everybody knew it was too much. And then this week they sent an email that was like, yeah, that was too much. And they gave us one of those planning periods back. And so now I should be less busy because at least I have 4 out of my 5 planning periods to actually. I have 4 hours a week to plan and grade and contact parents and all that, which, as we all know, 4 hours is enough to deal with all that stuff for about 120 different students.
It's half a workday. That's plenty, Sean. Come on.
Yeah, 4 hours a week. That's all it takes. But 4 hours a week is a lot better than 3 hours a week, let me tell you.
And we know you're all being overpaid, you fucking fat cat teachers.
Exactly.
Employees.
I did get my first paycheck from this job, which I have used to buy. It is not here yet. It is currently shipping. But I bought a desktop PC. Which is a thing I have been wanting to buy for years. Ever since I wanted to buy it when I think everyone started thinking that it might be a good idea to get a desktop PC when everyone work from home. And then that was also when you couldn't buy anything unless you wanted to pay like fucking $10,000 for a medium level PC. But I finally have getting that paycheck, and then I've got a better desk set up here at my house, and having to work. And I'm not work from home in the sense that I'm obviously teaching in class or in-person teaching, but I am work from home in that if you're a teacher, you're going to inevitably be working home like multiple hours every day and on the weekend. So I need a setup at home to be able to work nicely. And desktop PCs, if you want to buy a desktop PC, finally shit is at a relatively normal price point. I spent about $800 getting a decent level PC, which I'm very happy to finally get that and a monitor and stuff like that. And so that has been the other part of my week, was kind of researching some of that stuff and getting that all sorted.
That's funny. I actually just bought my first ever computer monitor over here.
Nice.
Because I've always, and it was purely I just realized I needed a second screen. I'm a laptop all the way guy. I always will be. I love having laptops. But I've just needed a second screen for some various work, including recording the podcast. At a certain point, I had too many things on one laptop screen. Mm-hmm. And right now, the Audacity window with the waveforms is over here. And I can just look at you over here, Sean, and it's easier. Stuff like that. Some stuff for work, like when I'm writing about films and stuff, it's sometimes nice to be able to put it on a second screen and type on a desk and not be out on my couch trying to do it on my lap. Mm-hmm. Stuff like that. So yeah, but that's cool. Is this a computer you're going to do any gaming on at all, or?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, okay. Yeah. So it's not the highest end gaming rig, but it's good enough. I mean, it's probably a little bit weaker than a PS5, which is, like
which is
more
plenty
than I
for
really
most
need.
PC stuff.
Yeah. But yeah, like I just like having getting the job where you're now like, I'm at the school, and then obviously they give you a desktop PC and a monitor and all that. Like it made me realize, man, desktops sure are convenient in a lot of ways, just because they're much more like, obviously they're not portable, but they've got like 1,000 USB ports. They've got USB ports coming out their ass, right? Like you can plug everything into it. You can plug like fucking 5 monitors into that goddamn thing if you want to. You can expand the storage as much as you want. So it's like I've been wanting to get a desktop PC for fucking ever. But it's just been like a hellscape, that market, for years. But yes, yeah. So I'm also going to get a dual monitor setup and all that kind of stuff. And I'm very excited to finally be settled in enough of a way that I can kind of get that stuff going.
Yeah, I'm happy to hear it. I'm glad you're getting a paycheck. That's good.
Yes.
Is the pay better in Texas than it was in Colorado? A
lot more. Yeah. I mean, I'll just say it because it's publicly accessible information. I'm getting paid $60,000 a year, or $60,600.
That's way more than Colorado. Wow.
I was getting paid $43,000 a year in Colorado. I would have had to work my old job in Colorado for over 10 years to reach the salary I get as a starting salary in Texas. And there's not to say that everything about being a teacher in Texas is like automatically better. There's like some policy stuff and things like that is more complicated than that. But just purely from a financial perspective, it is a very different story. $60,000 is still way underpaid for the amount of work you do, but it is like, it's not a thing where you look at someone working at like McDonald's and think, you're probably making more money than me a year.
Right.
It's you're kind of starting to get a little bit out of that territory.
Yeah, I mean, that's when you're in the $40,000 range. Like, I'll just say, I don't know if it's publicly accessible, but I make about $19,000 as a grad student. That's my stipend. And like, it would always be crazy to me to think like, man, a public school teacher who often will have a master's or something like that, right? Is only making double what I'm making. That's nuts, right?
Yeah.
That kind of thing. So, yeah, anyway, that's good. I mean, there was a report that came out recently, I think I tweeted about it, that Colorado is the most underpaid in the nation, comparable to other jobs in the state.
Yes.
And in absolute dollars, it's one of the most underpaid, just simply if you look at the numbers. So it's too bad. Colorado has problems, but we'll do our podcast on Tabor a different day.
Yes. Oh my God. Oh, fucking hell. Yeah, all that.
But neither of us live there. It doesn't matter anymore.
Yes.
Yeah. We're in red states where our votes don't count anymore.
Yes, our votes don't count, but at least, we don't have to talk about Tabor or stare into that fucking black pit of Colorado law ever again.
Well, anyway, should I talk about my stuff?
Yeah, what's going on in your world, Jonathan?
So, I've been busy, obviously. School started up, doing that stuff, working on my dissertation, all those sorts of fun things. Been playing some video games. This was like a total surprise last night. My brother bought me, because he wanted to play it with me, Nintendo Switch Sports.
Cool.
It's basically Wii Sports on the Nintendo Switch. And we played that for about an hour last night. It's very fun. It's a little under-featured right now because they're adding some sports later. Like, it doesn't have golf yet, and golf was probably my other favorite on Wii Sports originally. Like, bowling was the best. Mm-hmm. And the bowling on this is fun. But overall, it is definitely fun. It gets a lot of the Wii Sports kind of spirit in there. Of the games on there right now, bowling is a perennial favorite. The biggest difference is that Wii Sports was so old. It was a launch Wii title. You forget that the original Wiimote didn't have an accelerometer or anything in it. It was just an IR blaster. And the Joy-Cons are all gyrometers and accelerometer stuff, right? So the bowling, there's way more control and spin you can put on it, which is also messing me up because some of my old strategies don't just translate to a game that's like 15 years newer. But that's fun.
I mean, on the old Wii Sports, you definitely could like solve the bowling game effectively to get a strike 100% of the time because of how simple the input was.
Yeah, my brother Thomas had a move that he called the jab, which is basically on the Wiimote, he would just jab it forward and get a strike every time. That does not work anymore, luckily. Mm-hmm. So there you go. But there's the other sports. There's tennis, there's volleyball. Volleyball I could not figure out for the life of me, but I didn't go in and play the tutorials or anything. So there's probably more to it. It seemed kind of complicated. Tennis, as always, is fun. Badminton Badminton is actually surprisingly fun because the racket is a direct one-to-one to the Joy-Con, how you like turn it and everything. And you can keep, as in real life with badminton, the shuttlecock in the air for crazy amounts of time, and that's kind of fun. My favorite one on it, though, is soccer. There's a soccer mode that you can do it with like teams where you have like CPU team members, or you can just do one-on-one, and it basically looks like Rocket League with a big ball in the middle, but without rocket cars. And I had a lot of fun with that one because it's just crazy kicks you're doing by flinging the Joy-Con. I have not tried the mode where you strap it to your leg because the leg strap, I got the game digitally, so I don't have that yet. But I might get that because that sounds funny to me and I want to try it. But I have no idea if or how that works. Mm-hmm. So anyway, that's a little thing. Nintendo Switch Sports, that's fun to try. What I'm really excited for is Splatoon 3 comes out next week. And I was super excited last night because I went to download Switch Sports and Splatoon 3 was sitting on my home screen and I'm like, it's out already? Because I'd pre-ordered it. And I looked and I'm like, oh, you can't play it yet. And I'm like, oh, fuck, I forgot about it. It's next week, isn't it? So anyway. Yeah,
that's definitely one of the weird things about our digital age. Is if you preload or whatever a game, it's just like you're staring at that icon on your screen, which like I think if I was like a 10-year-old again, I would not be able to handle that. With how like if like when like Halo 2 came out, like sitting there and every time you played a game, you're staring at the Halo 2 logo, being like, I can't fucking play it, but it's sitting there. I know that like 99% of the data is already loaded on this fucking hard drive, and I just need that like unlock key basically of the executable to play it. That would have driven me crazy if I was a kid.
I don't buy most like $60 Switch games digitally. I mostly buy those physically. But I do like how Nintendo does it. You pre-order the game, and then it doesn't charge your card until a week before launch, and then it charges your card and downloads it. That's a very like nice way for them to do it. I'm sure I like I said, I mostly don't buy $60 games digitally because I think it's some kind of weird ripoff, and I want the disc, and I don't know. It's weird for me, but yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So anyway. But the big thing I wanted to talk about here is these two new fantasy spin-off shows that have launched in the last 2 weeks and have been big hits and garnered a lot of attention, which is HBO has House of the Dragon, which is their first spin-off of Game of Thrones. That's aired 2 episodes. By the time you hear this podcast, there will have been 3, but we're recording this Sunday afternoon. It airs Sunday night. I'm actually going to a viewing party for episode 3 tonight with some friends, so that should be fun. So we've had 2 episodes of that, and then there's The Lord of the Rings, The Rings of Power, the very well-titled show on Amazon that exists because Jeff Bezos slammed his hand on a table in a meeting and said, I want my Game of Thrones. And that sounds like me joking. That is the actual story that has been reported in the press of how this show came to be, and is the most expensive show ever made. They've spent close to $1 billion on it just for this first season, and getting the rights to do it and everything. So yeah, I think before, like a year ago, before we had info on either of these, I probably would have said, I don't care about the Game of Thrones thing at all. We'll see about the Lord of the Rings thing. And I am now very opposite of that. I think House of the Dragon is awesome. It's a really good show. It is exactly what I think I want as kind of a Game of Thrones fan, which is Game of Thrones, and I say Game of Thrones fan, I really consider myself, I love the George R. R. Martin books. I really do love those. And I now have no idea what my overall feelings are on the TV show, because the TV show had tons of good stuff in it, but it also had the worst ending to anything I've ever seen in my life. So there you go. Like, how do you... Like, the other day, the box set of the entire show on 4K was on sale for, like, under $100. And I considered it for a second. Because there's no other TV shows on 4K Blu-ray. And I was like, that seems cool. And then I was like, can I watch Game of Thrones again? Can I ever sit down from episode 1 and watch, like, those first 4 seasons that I loved when I know it's all going to lead to crap? I don't know. I don't know if I could do that.
Yeah, I mean, you'll just be like having that speech from the end of the show about stories or whatever playing in the back of your head, being like, "Oh, fucking shit." Yeah. Or you'll just be like having nightmares of the episode where they go above the wall with all the zombies and the zombie dragon and all that shit, where they like Call of Duty airlift people out with a fucking dragon.
Yes. So anyway, like I said, but I enjoy the books. And this show, what piqued my interest about this show was hearing some of the behind-the-scenes stuff. I mean, one, nobody who was principally involved in Game of Thrones, the original show, is involved in this show. other than this first season was co-showrun by Miguel Sapochnik, who was the best director on the original Game of Thrones. He did Hard Home, he did the Battle of the Bastards, he did like the big not long night episode in the last season. Some of those I don't like the scripts for, but they're well-directed episodes of television, right? And so he was the principal director setting up this show. It's showrun by a guy named Ryan Condal, and then co-created by George R. R. Martin, who is significantly involved in sort of like creative assisting the show. He doesn't literally write on it, but he's given them advice and consulted on stuff. And what it is it's a show set 200 years before the main plot of Game of Thrones during the Targaryen dynasty of Westeros. And it is about the Targaryen Civil War, known in the world as the Dance of Dragons. And it is basically recounting that piece of history, starting... it picks up about 24 years before that Dance of Dragons war begins, at least by the book chronology. They might compress this on the show. And then it will eventually go forward all the way through that war, which means... And when I realized what the show was actually going to be about, I got interested in it because this all comes from a book George R. R. Martin wrote a couple years ago called Fire and Blood, which is like a big history text of the Targaryen dynasty in Westeros. And this is like a big stretch from the middle of that book about that civil war. And that means it's a fairly focused story that has a clear beginning, middle, and end that has already been written. They're not going to run into the problem that Game of Thrones ran into. And it won't be a bunch of seasons. This will be 3 seasons. I would be shocked if this goes 4, because I don't know what a 4th season would be. Like, there's a pretty clear trilogy structure to me in the actual book of what you would make this. So it's it seems like a good idea, and then it's mostly focused at the beginning, at least in King's Landing. It's the political side of things. It's not going to have a million characters and subplots all over the world and that kind of thing that sometimes bog down Game of Thrones. The cast is great. It's Paddy Considine and Matt Smith and Rhys Ifans, and then some newcomers as well who are very good. So I was kind of curious about this, and then I actually watched the show, and I think those first 2 episodes are great. I think they are, if you like that side of Game of Thrones, the sort of political intrigue side of it, it's a really well done version of it. It is phenomenally directed. It looks like the second most expensive TV show ever made, now that I think Rings of Power looks like the most expensive. But it's better directed. I mean, Miguel Sapochnik is a great director. I think this show is better directed than anything in Game of Thrones already, just because Game of Thrones was this weird thing where it started with a relatively low budget, got bigger, but they didn't get rid of the old sets. So it always was sometimes a bigger budget on lower budget areas. This one, they completely redid the entire interior of King's Landing so that it's one big continuous set, so they can do a scene where the camera just moves into the throne room from another room, and you can just walk through all of that. So they did a lot of rebuilds. The Iron Throne they completely redesigned to be a little more in line with Martin's books, where there's just swords everywhere and it's sharp, and if you sit on the Iron Throne you bleed because there's swords sticking up out of you and all this stuff. So the production design is amazing. It's really beautifully shot. It does a lot of the low light stuff Miguel Sapochnik did, but one benefit it has now is HBO Max streams in Dolby Vision 4K, so that the HDR, you're not going to have the problems Game of Thrones had where you couldn't see the episode because the stream quality was so bad. This show does not have that problem, luckily, because HBO Max has fixed some of those issues. So gorgeous show, amazing cast. I like sort of the intrigue of it and the characters so far. I think it hits the ground running with a first episode that very clearly, I think, delineates the stakes and some of the ideas of this show and this period of the world. And then I think the second episode continues that and is even better than the first and does some really interesting things. And I just like it. And I liked the first episode so much that I went, and I'm almost done with it. I'm reading that Fire and Blood book. I bought it on Kindle and I've been reading that on my phone. And I love that book. It's you have to know what you're getting into. It is basically the most luxuriously written Wikipedia article ever, because it is a big history book of the Targaryen dynasty, which is something, what I love about it is you can tell the joy George R. R. Martin takes in just the pure world building. He doesn't have to write characters or dialogue. He can write history, and I think he loves to do that. I think that was something that helped Elden Ring a lot in his contributions to that. In fact, this book made me realize how much I want the Elden Ring version of this book, where it's just George R. R. Martin telling me history facts about the world of Elden Ring. That would be very fun to read. But yeah, it's I've heard it compared to the Silmarillion, and that is a bad comparison. The Silmarillion which is Tolkien's kind of book of history about Middle-earth, is written more like myth or religious text. It's very much kind of an eye of God perspective. This book, Fire and Blood, is written like a popular history for public consumption in the world of Westeros. And so the book is very much about the gaps in historical knowledge and what we do and don't know and how we come to know it. I think that's kind of one of the themes running through it in kind of an oblique way. And then this show gets to play with that in fun ways. But I think it's actually a great kind of thing to adapt a TV show into, because the showrunners have basically this hyper-detailed plot outline for everything that's going to happen on the show. But because it's written as a history, they get to invent basically who the characters are, what their personalities are, how they talk, how they interact, those sorts of things. And they get to invent individual scenes, and then they have these outlines for these amazing battles that are going to happen, lots of cool shit on dragons. It gets very big. I think it must actually be a pretty fun show to write on because of that sort of relative level of freedom, but with that amount of detail that you have. So I'm enjoying it, and I'm enjoying it, like, honestly, this feels more like it is a TV show prequel to George R. R. Martin's books than it is a prequel to the Game of Thrones TV show in some ways, because I think it does a better job, certainly than the later seasons of Game of Thrones did, in capturing Martin's voice and kind of the overall kind of feeling of that world. So I'm liking it a lot. I think if you were burned by the end of Game of Thrones, but you want more of the stuff you liked on Game of Thrones, depending on what parts of it you liked, House of the Dragon might very much be for you. And I think you don't need to worry about getting burned because they have the story. I think they're going to have to, it's going to be a challenge because every single fucking character in this show is going to die. Like, that is, it's a big Civil War story. I don't think that's a spoiler. Like, it is a bloody, brutal conflict. And I think they're going to have to figure out how they want to end it so it isn't completely, just depressing. But they have a very clear direction where a lot of good stuff is going to happen, and it's going to be very high on incident over a short period of time. So I'm liking this show a lot.
Yeah, it sounds interesting. Yeah, because I think I was with you. I was very trepidatious about the idea of another Game of Thrones production from HBO after what happened to that original show.
Yes.
But yeah, I think we're in the same boat in terms of the stuff we liked about Game of Thrones is a lot of the fantasy War of the Roses side of it, the verisimilitude of the historical fiction kind of quality to it is really exceptional. And that's the stuff that particularly started going away the further the show got in, because the more it went into the anime original territory, the more it went to now we're just sort of compressing these character relationships into a single episode would have been 2 seasons, and now they just get to be over on the other side of the world because they have to for plot reasons. That stuff just murdered all of the interesting again, that verisimilitude quality of it that the show had when it was at its best. And so the idea of this prequel that just gets to be much more focused on that and gets to also hopefully it seems get rid of some of the the unfocused nature of Game of Thrones, even when it was good, would be very frustrating to me. And it sounds like this is not to say that it's just going to be purely, narrow or whatever in its focus, but is going to be much more sort of controlled than Game of Thrones, which was very wild even at the best of times in terms of the number of characters that were completely disconnected from each other that it had to try to cut between all the time. It seems like this is a much better setup that would avoid those problems.
Yeah, I think that's all true. And I, like you, it's that verisimilitude I love. That's what I love about the book Fire and Blood. It's just very good at feeling like it's an actual history. And the Targaryen Civil War in particular it's basically a series of imagined but very inspired by real history, but with dragons, basically. So, I read something today near the end of the Civil War period that is basically the sacking of Versailles, but with dragons. I like that idea. I like the idea of all the peasants go to sack Versailles. Uh-oh, there's dragons inside. That's a cool idea. That's going to be a really good episode in season 3 of House of the Dragon if they get there. So, that's the kind of stuff that is fun. And if that's what you like, that's the good stuff. And again, I want George R. R. Martin to finish the Game of Thrones books, but I also do want his 1,000-page Elden Ring tome where he just gives us the lore Bible. I really want that.
I would be way into that.
Yeah. If we could just like clone George R. R. Martin so he can write all this stuff, that would be great. I think he should submit to that. But anyway, House of the Dragon is great. It's also, I should just mention, the music is still by Ramin Djawadi, who did Game of Thrones, and it's still phenomenal. The only kind of weird choice, and this feels like this was probably an HBO choice, is that it has the same theme song. It has a different theme song animation, and I think the animation is very cool. And it's a re-recording that has like kind of a heavier drum line and is a little darker, but it is the same theme song. That bothered some people more, but that is kind of one of the only kind of weird things where I'm like, oh, they really want you to know this is a Game of Thrones show, you know?
Yeah, that is kind of weird. Yeah, because I had seen that scuttlebutt on Twitter of people being like, why did they just keep the same theme song? And I bet it is probably like HBO marketing people being like, no, we gotta salvage our Game of Thrones thing, man. If there's one thing that everyone can agree about Game of Thrones, they had a great fucking theme song. So just, it's not the worst thing in the world to just stick with what worked.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of my perspective is, if it had been an original one, I guarantee you the scuttlebutt would have been, oh, I didn't like it as much as the Game of Thrones theme song. Why didn't they just use the Game of Thrones theme song? I guarantee you that would have been a theme on Twitter.
I mean, they should have just gone and licensed a sick J-Rock song and just copy what anime does. Is my feeling on all opening themes for American TV shows. Is like, why don't you do it like anime does it? Because anime does it way better.
Why? You know what? We're in this period where there's more and more American studios like contracting with anime companies to do cool stuff. Why didn't they just have someone in Japan get some crazy like Madhouse or someone to do a Game of Thrones anime opening that they just put on House of the Dragon and each season come up with a new one? That'd be the sickest shit ever.
It'd be so good.
Yes. You'd be watching the show. They'd have one more viewer.
I would. Yeah, I need like a shot of like Matt Smith enveloped in darkness reaching his hand up in like to like a light that is receding away from him as the chorus comes in. Like that's what I want to see.
Oh, and Matt Smith is good on this, by the way. It has been depressing. Matt Smith has been in bad stuff since Doctor Who. This is, I think, finally a part that is worthy of his talents. And having read the book this is based on, he will get to do some very cool shit. And I'm glad that Matt Smith is in a good TV show that is using his talents and not another bad Terminator movie or whatever the bad shit he's done since Doctor Who.
Like Morbius, everybody's favorite movie.
Morbius. Part of that meme where he dances and turns into a vampire, it's a fun meme. It feels like the low point of his career, but it is a fun meme.
Yes. Yeah. I saw that clip on YouTube and it made me sad.
Rings of Power, on the other hand, the Lord of the Rings show. Have you watched this yet?
No.
Okay.
No.
It's boring. It's so boring. I don't know what to say about this show. When I did a little Twitter thread on it the other day after I watched both of the first 2 episodes, because it launched with 2 episodes, both over an hour long. House of the Dragon, I think the first one is a tiny bit over an hour, but I think the second one came in under an hour. So there you go. They are not on probation yet with me. Rings of Power immediately on probation because it's 2 hour-plus episodes with no story. The thing I came to doing this Twitter thread, though, is this feels to me like a CW show with the production values of a massive Hollywood epic. And what I mean by that is, it is genuinely gorgeous. This is the most money that's ever been poured into an American TV show, and you would know that whether you read the reporting or not, because the direction, its main goal, J.A. Bayona directed the first 2 episodes, and I think his main goal is to show off the money, and it shows off the money very well. I think it's a little uneven because I think some scenes are better done than others, and I don't think it has any kind of directorial vision the way Miguel Sapochnik has for House of the Dragon. But it does look expensive. There's good shots. There's a shot in the little prologue section of Valinor, like at the height of its powers, that is a beautiful image. It's taken from an Alan Lee painting in Lord of the Rings. It looks cool. And that's one of the only moments in this show that made me feel anything. It does have an amazing score. They got Bear McCreary to do the music for this show. And Bear McCreary is I feel like one of the best kept secrets in Hollywood. He should be doing more stuff. He's a fucking genius. And this is an amazing score. You can go listen to the soundtrack album, and I would recommend doing that instead of watching the show. It's a great set of music. It's some of the best music I've ever heard written for American TV. It's fantastic. There is nothing else to it, though. It is a very shallow piece of writing so far. It is ostensibly doing It's trying to find the Lord of the Rings equivalent to House of the Dragon, which doesn't exist in Tolkien, is the thing. So what it has chosen to do is a Second Age story, basically the rise of Sauron and the forging of the rings and the fall of Numenor, and then all the Isildur shit, I presume, will be the end of it. If you've read Lord of the Rings or the appendices, you know that stuff happens over like 4,000 years. Yeah. They are compressing it into like a human lifespan for this show. That does not inherently bother me, but that is like the kind of scale they're working with. But Tolkien did not write like a super, super detailed history of this stuff. So it's not quite the same as Fire and Blood. There's a lot that they are having to invent. They've chosen to sort of nominally make Galadriel the lead, although it's hard to tell, because for the second episode, which is called Adrift, she's literally lost at sea for an entire hour doing nothing. So great use of your protagonist in episode 2. But so Galadriel's kind of your lead. Elrond is a major character. He looks like he's a member of One Direction, and he is Elrond. And you have then some Harfoot characters who are like the predecessors of hobbits. You have some Sylvan elves. They are doing another Beren and Luthien with an elf and a human, because just it happens all the time. Apparently, it's not actually that rare. Just there's Beren and Luthiens everywhere. And that's a story going on. There's some stuff with the dwarves, which is actually the only part of this show that's kind of fun, because dwarves are cool, where you have Durin and all of his people under the mountain and building Khazad-dûm. So you've got all of those different things. So far, they have nothing to do with each other. The only way you would know where this show is going is if you have read the appendices of Lord of the Rings, like me or other nerds. Otherwise, this show gives you no indication of what the overarching plot will be. There is no sense of overarching structure. There's absolutely nothing that shows you how these different plots are connecting with one another. They're completely disconnected so far, much more so than like Game of Thrones. Game of Thrones sometimes could be a little sprawling, but you fundamentally understood why the stuff in the north affected the stuff in King's Landing, right?
Sure.
Or like Daenerys is over in the east, she wants to come rule King's Landing, there's the relationship. There's none of that in Rings of Power so far. And I think it's horribly written. I think it is attempting to do Tolkien dialogue, kind of, but it just comes across sounding like CW dialogue. And there are some CW shows that I loved very much, like Supergirl, but there's a certain kind of corny, earnest quality that also comes from they wrote 22 of those shows a year. This one they have 8, and it sounds like... Here, I'll tell you something about myself, so it doesn't sound like I'm just shitting on this show. When I was in high school, Sean and I did a lot of machinima projects. And like video game things, like in Halo. And one of the machinima projects we had in the works for a while that never got made was a Halo version of Romeo and Juliet.
Oh, yeah.
I wrote a whole script for that. And there were parts of that where I had to change the story. So I tried my hand at writing Shakespearean iambic pentameter to fill in dialogue. And I have not gone back and read that, but I'm sure it is crap and cringy and bad. And that is the quality of writing on Rings of Power, is a 14-year-old trying to write like J.R.R. Tolkien, and they can't. And that is what it sounds like, and it just does not pass the smell test. I am one of the bigger Lord of the Rings fans you will find. It does not feel authentic at any point, anywhere. Like, none of this... Some of it looks nice. There is no point in these 2 hours where any of the part of my heart that loves Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit was piqued and went, oh, this is for me. You know, the Hobbit movies are very hit and miss. They have a lot of problems. They are full of moments that make me go, oh, that's Tolkien. That's Lord of the Rings. That feels great. There's none of that in here. There's almost nothing to say about it, and it's kind of gotten a pass from critics, and I think that's because Amazon chose to only show it to critics in a movie theater and did not send them like normal screeners. So they really got to kind of focus on the majesty of it all, and I get that. But on a story and like pace level, it's so dull. Literally nothing happens in these 2 episodes. It's people talking about stuff that might happen one day. Nothing happens. I think it's boring. I think it looks nice, but I don't think the direction has any vision to it or any unifying sense of how it is going to tell this story visually. It's just a giant nothing burger of a show. And they've already... And you know, the whole thing about this show is Jeff Bezos slammed his fist on a table and said, get me my Game of Thrones. And they spent a lot of money getting Lord of the Rings. And they had spent all that money before they ever hired anyone to write it. They had committed to 5 seasons before they ever hired anyone to write it. And the people they hired to write it have never had a produced screenplay before. And it kind of feels like that. It's a very expensive show that was made because the richest man in the world wanted to have something on his shelf, not because anyone had an organic vision for what the show should be.
Yeah, I think it's like there's a fundamental problem with it, and like I think the reason why I was not particularly interested and didn't really feel compelled to check it out. I mean, one of the reasons I didn't check it out is because I feel like I develop a rash if I start watching an hour-long episode of a TV show. Like, I can't do it anymore. It's brutal most of the time. Every once in a while, you'll get something that can justify it, but it's very few and far between. But the problem is that, like, if you wanted to do your... Let's take chunks of the Silmarillion and the appendices and some of the other scattered writings that J.R.R. Tolkien left and adapt it into a TV show, the only way to do it is to do an anthology show. I guess the only reasonable way to do it. You cannot do a contiguous narrative adapting that material into TV. It's just not possible. Because as you say, like, most of that material takes place over the course of thousands of years of this world's history. It's written in a mythological context. It is not meant to be understood and processed as, like, literal a lot of the times, because it is religion and it's myth, and it's like stylistically how it's written. And so the idea of trying to sort of fashion some sort of narrative that you can follow through in a linear fashion with the TV show with these big expensive hour-long episodes with like a dozen different subplots going on that you're cutting between, the style that we have been kind of stuck with a lot of the kind of prestige style TV for like 10 plus years at this point is so... I would think it's like a kind of a bad style most of the time anyways. It is a particularly bad approach to this material. And it's like, unfortunately, I can't imagine a studio doing a big anthology show. And I don't know whether or not audiences more broadly how they would receive an anthology show, because we don't do TV like that anymore. It's been so long since you had anything high profile that really worked that way. But if you had every single episode was just jumped around and said, here's this story, we're going to tell this story, and it's going to be a 30-minute episode or whatever, and it's this little chunk from the Silmarillion, or it's this little chunk from the appendices, and you get to see the like big scale stuff of like the tapestry of the myth and the history of this world in the spaces between the stories. But I think the only way you can reasonably adapt into TV is by zooming in and taking it in bite-sized chunks, and just nobody does TV that way anymore, at least in America.
Yeah, and, I have heard from some critics and people online when people will complain about the sprawl of the Rings of Power, of having the dozen locations like all modern TV shows. They'll be like, but that's what Lord of the Rings is, right? That's just... No, it absolutely is not. The Hobbit, the original book Tolkien wrote, is Bilbo's POV from page 1 to page last, so much so that when the big battle happens, we don't see it because Bilbo was knocked out. The Lord of the Rings is in Frodo's POV from the time Bilbo leaves in chapter 1 until like page 500 when the Fellowship breaks. And then it is in Aragorn's POV for hundreds of pages. And then you go back to Frodo for hundreds of pages. It's actually very focused. Tolkien does not do intercutting in that way. He's very good when he tells a story about usually starting small and branching out, but with a perspective. They could have done that with this show with the way they've structured it. They have these Harfoot characters. If that's the way they wanted to go, that's one thing you could do if you're kind of reimagining it. They have Galadriel. If they wanted to do a season where every episode is Galadriel visits a different race or area of Middle-earth and tries to get them on her side, that's a way you could tell the story. But they've gone for none of that. They've gone for, we're going to use sort of the Game of Thrones structure. And that's not Lord of the Rings. It just isn't. And just because they are both broadly high fantasy doesn't mean that the story structure of one works for the other. That's crazy.
It's just like, it just feels like everything you're saying about the show is, I think, exactly what we kind of feared about it and have been fearing about it for a couple of years at this point. Because it's just like everything you heard about it pre-release just felt like it was setting this up. And then it was particularly when they started putting out some of the trailers, it's like you watch those trailers and there's no story in it. They don't pitch anything to you in those trailers other than here's the Lord of the Rings like visuals and some nice music. And it's like, and yeah, like the visuals and music are very nice, and I have listened to some of the soundtrack because I like Lord of the Rings, I like music, and I like Bear McCreary, and so I was like, hey, I'll listen to this because I don't even need to watch the show. And it's like all that stuff is very nice, but at the end of the day, the TV show needs to have a story somewhere in it. It needs to have like proper characters somewhere in it, and when you can't even cut together a trailer that shows that stuff off, it sends me a bad message about what your show is going to be.
Yeah, I mean, again, not to beat a dead horse with this comparison, but they did premiere like days apart. House of the Dragon is a very easy one-sentence pitch. It's the Targaryens are at the height of their rule in Westeros. There's a succession crisis, and there's a civil war. Rings of Power, Sauron? Question mark. Is like the kind of like show. And also, who cares? Who fucking cares? Like, this is... So you're doing a 5-season show basically about the prologue Galadriel narrated in Fellowship of the Ring? Great. It's not going to be as good as what Peter Jackson did in those 10 minutes. I'm sorry. Yeah. Like, what are you talking about? Whatever. Anyway, it's bad. I don't like it. I came up with, if Amazon, Amazon has bought the rights to do TV adaptations of Lord of the Rings. That's what they have. They have the book and they have the appendices. So I have come up with 4 ideas for spin-offs that they should do using that material. Okay. All right. We're going to start small. My first pitch... Jeff Bezos, if you're listening, feel free to use this. I mean, give me money. You have plenty of it. It's called Everybody Loves Samwise. This is a TV sitcom. It is a half-hour multicam shot live in front of a studio audience. This is after Frodo leaves Middle-earth. Sam is the mayor of Hobbiton. This is what happens in the appendices. And it is just about... It's basically the Andy Griffith Show, but he's mayor instead of sheriff. And he goes home every day to Rosie and the kids. And they have fun misadventures. And you have the cute kids who grow up into full-fledged hobbits. And a couple times a season, Merry and Pippin will come on screen and everyone will cheer wildly. There will be a season 3 plot about one of Sam's kids getting into Pippin's stash of pipeweed, and you get to do the anti-drug episode. It's going to be great. I think you get Sean Astin back because he's not doing much else. Get Sean Astin to be Samwise and just make a fun 22-minute-a-week sitcom. Everybody loves Samwise. I would watch the shit out of this.
I love the idea of Pippin being the like zany neighbor character.
Yes.
That's what I want Pippin to be. And then, yes, then you have your very special episode with the pipeweed. I like this idea. I think let's go for it. You know, we're all about that like kind of 80s, early 90s nostalgia kind of stuff. And it's like, let's bring back the 80s style sitcom only with Lord of the Rings characters. It's a natural fit.
Natural fit. And as you said, Pippin as the kind of zany neighbor character, everyone's going to love that. So much so that we get a spin-off of Everybody Loves Samwise, and it's going to be called Too Many Tooks. And it is where Pippin, Peregrine Took, has to move back to Brandybuck to be with all his Took relatives. It's going to be basically kind of Arrested Development, where like he has to go get all the Tooks together. But it is Too Many Tooks. It's all the Tooks together, and Peregrine, he's trying to like keep the family together. But it's going to be really zany, lots of antics. This will be more of a single cam sitcom in the style of like a 2000s era sitcom instead of your kind of 90s Everybody Loves Samwise. It's going to be, you know, a little smarter and edgier, but I think people are really going to like it.
I think we can do a third spin-off to hit a more highbrow audience, and we can just call it Marryadoc, and it's about Mary moves to Rohan, and it's kind of like a Frasier style, you know, a little bit more intellectual humor, because Mary's a bit more of a serious character, and it's, you know, it's about him sort of, you know, living his life out there in Rohan with the humans, and giving them his kind of worldly knowledge.
Well, there you go. So we're going to have 5 total, or maybe more. So yeah, we have Too Many Tooks. We're going to get Marryadoc. We've already had 3 shows just from one idea, right? So This is great. Jeff Bezos, you are making an empire here of Lord of the Rings shows. I think we need, at some point, there will be a backdoor pilot on one of these shows where Legolas and Gimli come to visit Hobbiton and have an adventure, and that will be the backdoor pilot for a show called The Adventures of Legolas and Gimli. I am imagining like a 90s style sci-fi show, like Xena Warrior Princess or something, but it is with Legolas and Gimli going around having adventures. It's going to be very episodic, and every episode will start with Legolas coming to Gimli and describing the problem, and Gimli will go, small chance of success? What are we waiting for? Yes! Right into the opening credits, The Adventures of Legolas and Gimli, and people are going to love that. It's going to have a very moving series finale as well, when they build a little ship together and sail off to the Eastern Lands alone.
It's very good. I've got a pitch for you also, Jonathan. What if we do, where we bring back the classic police procedural and we make CSI Gondor. And it's about Faramir, who is now captain of the Guard of Gondor, and he has to investigate crimes taking place in the White City.
I think that's great. And I think that's definitely one where there's going to be the very fun episode where Legolas and Gimli go to Gondor to help out their buddy, Aragorn, who's now LSR. And, he's a little sad because everyone knows him as the king, but these are his friends who knew him as Aragorn. And that is where we will meet Faramir, and we will have our backdoor pilot for CSI Gondor.
Yeah, and then there's one time where they have Pippin comes over from Too Many Tooks, but it's, Billy Boyd gets to show off his more dramatic side on the Faramir show on CSI Gondor. Yes. And it's like, he gets to show, it's just a real, intense episode, and that's where, he gets his Emmy for that episode and that crossover.
And we should say, none of this is us going off book. This is all details. Like, Pippin went and visited Gondor many times in the appendices because he was the squire. It's great. Finally, my last idea, not related to these other ones. I think, your Amazon, it's 4-quadrant, you want to get everyone. We need a show for the kids. And so I suggest, I don't know what you would call this, but I want to do Reading Rainbow, but instead of LeVar Burton, it's Treebeard. And it takes...
So, Jonathan, this is the exact idea that I was just thinking in my head was we need a kids show that's like Treebeard and the Ents. I cannot believe how much we are in sync on these bad ideas.
Indeed. So, LeVar Burton would take 5 minutes to read you Goodnight Moon. Treebeard is going to take an hour to do Goodnight Moon. And if it's a longer children's book, these are going to be long episodes because Treebeard talks slowly, but I think the kids are going to love it.
1 fish, 2 fish, red fish, blue fish.
I want this show so bad. That's the one, I think, honestly, in my heart, that's the one I want to see the most, because it would be very funny, and it would be great. There you go. I think we just pitched 6 TV shows, all of which, by the way, are easier to describe to people than The Lord of the Rings, The Rings of Power.
Yes, and you would be able to make all of them for, all of them combined for, 2% of the budget of your 8-episode show that you just made.
Oh, yeah. Everybody loves Samwise. I don't want it to just be like a 90s show. They need to shoot it on, beta tapes. It needs to look like crap. That's the only way it works.
Exactly.
Yeah. So, there you go, Jeff. If you're listening from your penis-shaped rocket ship, there are some ideas. And honestly, I think they'd go way more viral. I think people would be tweeting about these every week.
Hey, I'd fucking watch it.
Yeah. Sean, you want to talk about some news?
What's going on in the news, Jonathan?
What the fuck is going on with Halo Infinite?
We want to do Halo Infinite, the Death Watch segment.
Halo Infinite, Death Watch. Sean, what is the status of our patient at this point in time?
It's pretty dire, Jonathan. Yeah, so for people who haven't been keeping up with Halo Infinite, which is everybody who has ever played Halo Infinite, it's... where we were at, because I think because we talked about this in April or something, was Halo Infinite shed most of its multiplayer population pretty shortly after launch because it, had its big, fancy launch. The campaign was pretty good. People really liked that. And they thought, hey, 343, they nailed it. They've got a solid foundation. This is what we said. This was the general sentiment. A solid foundation, and it's a live service, free-to-play multiplayer game, and they can only go up from here. It's all about that post-launch support, and then they've given it effectively no post-launch support. The game will be 1 year old in a couple of months here. They have added 2 maps in the almost year that the game has been live. They have added, I think, 2 or 3 different multiplayer modes. They have fixed a handful of the bugs. They've made a couple of balance changes. But most of the major issues that existed in the game have not been fixed, like networking issues and things like that. There has been almost no meaningful content, almost no meaningful live service events and stuff like that. Their events are still at the level of we put Fiesta in the game for as a playlist for a month, and you get a separate battle pass for it. That's very much kind of the territory Halo Infinite had been in for a while. They had a 6-month-long season 1, which was twice as long as what they said their seasons were going to be. They said their seasons were going to be 3 months, but season 1 was going to be double that length because of the state of the game at launch. And then when it came around April, around the time season 1 was going to wrap up, they said, hey, season 2 is also going to be 6 months, because I know we said it would be 3 months, but we need that extra time. But campaign co-op will come out in season 2, and Forge will come out near the end of season 2. We are now basically at the point, I think, more or less, or we're a couple of months away from the point where season 2 would have originally ended, and they came out and said, hey, you know what? We said season 2 is going to be 6 months. What if we made that about 10 months? Because now season 2 will have run from the beginning of May into March of next year. They have announced that at November 8th, which is when Season 2 would have originally ended, they are entering what they have called the Halo Infinite Winter Update, which I guess is just a different nomenclature for like what would have been Season 3. But if they had called this Season 3, they would have just had to say, hey, all that stuff we said was going to come in Season 2, now it has been pushed to Season 3. And so instead of saying that, they just said Season 2 just goes on for 4 more months, because sometime between November 8th and March 7th is when they are currently saying, and I think you cannot take anything at face value at this point because all of these things have been delayed multiple times. They are now saying that some point between November and March, we will get campaign co-op, but you will not get split screen co-op. That feature has been canceled. But campaign network co-op will be in there. Mission replay, they're going to add into the game sometime between November and March. The beta of Forge will be in the game sometimes between November and March, although it is, I think, very unclear in what way Forge will be integrated in any way in the multiplayer, because they don't have anything other than called a custom game browser that will be added, which seems to be the only thing I can think of that would allow you to actually like do your file share stuff and sort of actually get Forge maps, and that's not until the actual Season 3. So I don't know what Forge beta means in terms of you being able to play other people's Forge maps. They're going to add 2 new maps between November and March. But both of those are Forge maps made by 343, so they're not custom original maps. They're made internally with their map-based tools. They're going to enter a beta of what they're saying is Match XP, which is like, I believe that's the feature of, if you got a killing spree, hey, you get a little bit of extra XP. If you do good things in the match, you get some XP for it. The thing that every fucking multiplayer game has worked since like 2007 with Call of Duty 4 or Halo Reach that way. And finally, they're going to enter a beta phase of that feature sometime almost a year after the game's release. They will add a new game mode called Covert One Flag, which that doesn't sound like a new game mode. That sounds like a variant of single flag, capture the flag. They will have a couple of events and quality of life improvements. And that's what we're getting basically for the 1-year anniversary of Halo Infinite.
Sean, game development is hard. I recognize that. We don't want people to crunch. We want there to be healthier systems in the industry, all of that stuff. But if you can't make a video game, just don't. You don't have to. If what you are saying is it will be between a year and a year and a half after launch before we add the ability to replay missions in the game.
Yeah.
Maybe pack it in. Maybe this isn't for you. And that's okay. If I ran a sandwich shop and every day I just gave people 2 pieces of bread with nothing in the middle and went, God, I forgot to buy meat again today or anything to put in the sandwich, but you can have these 2 pieces of bread. I will be charging you for the full sandwich, though. I'll fix it tomorrow. And then I said, tomorrow technically will last 9 months. I don't know. I don't think I should run a sandwich shop anymore. What is going on here? I've never seen anything like this. I feel like the most comparable thing might be a Cyberpunk 2077. But even then, I don't know if that game ever became good, but they did technically, go back and finish it and put it out. I still think it was a giant scam that should be prosecuted. This is bizarre. This is on the level of, we forgot to put in pause functionality when we launched the game, but between a year and a half post-launch, we may have pause functionality. Yay!
I mean, it's incredibly dire, the state the game is in. Because again, because even with the stuff that they've announced, lots of really major issues with the game like the customization is completely fucked. Have gone only addressed in very minor ways. I believe right now you can use your color schemes across all your armor sets in your visor colors across all your armor sets. For people who don't know, Halo Infinite has a very frustratingly bad customization system whereby different armor pieces are locked behind what is called an armor core. So like you have your Mark V armor core and whatnot, and every battle pass has its own armor core that the armor you unlock for that battle pass is sort of gated behind. So you cannot mix and match pieces between armor cores, which is incredibly limiting and frustrating. And at launch, and for like 8 months or something of the game's life, it has been that even things like your color scheme were associated with only an armor core. So you had to re-unlock like blue, or like like a cobalt, a slightly different, I think the basic suite of like red, blue, green, yellow, and brown and black were on everything. But if you wanted like teal, you had to, re-unlock that for your fucking samurai armor or whatever bullshit. The same thing with, like, if you wanted a gold visor, you had to re-unlock it. The color variants, from what I understand, are now universal. That's the thing that should never have had to have been changed. It should have been universal from the beginning. But also, like, most of those armor pieces are just shoulder pieces and helmets and stuff like that. That should be interchangeable. And it's a way less customizable game than Halo Reach was. Even though Halo Infinite technically has more armor pieces, you have less configurations because so many of the armor pieces are locked behind this bad armor core system. That is a thing they've said they're working on changing, but it currently is not changed in any meaningful way. Right? They're entering some kind of beta thing with this Match XP. Who knows what that looks like? And I don't know if that's going to involve a thing that the whole community has been asking for, which is like a service record feature, like what like every modern shooter has, which is hey, once I get like 1,000 kills, here's a award and like an emblem and a piece of XP. And then when you get 10,000 kills and those kind of milestone markers, Halo Reach was really cool with that, and you got a lot of cool stuff, and there were lots of very interesting challenges for you to complete based on that kind of lifetime playing of the game. Like, there's lots of those kinds of fairly basic features you would expect from a running live service modern shooter that you would have expected from a game like this for over 10 years at this point, that are still missing and are not anywhere on this roadmap. And I think the thing that is like really shocking to see on the roadmap is this is not for the winter update. This is for their season 3, which is currently, the actual season 3 is projected to be March 7th to June 27th. I would not take that at face value that is when that will actually be, because again, they have every single thing they have done has been delayed multiple times at this point. But they're saying March to June will be their season 3, which, to be fair, that's only a 4-month season. So, like, that's actually a reasonable span of time, not fucking 10 months. But in that suite of features that they're adding, which is mostly pretty barren, it's 2 maps, an arena map, a big team battle map. It's a new weapon, which is basically the DMR. It's a new piece of equipment that looks like it's like the bubble shield or something. But then in the bottom of their roadmap thing I'm looking at, it says for season 3, in-game reporting. What in-game reporting is there is currently not a way in the game's interface to report someone for cheating or like profane or unacceptable behavior. That is a thing you have to go to like a web browser thing on a separate device and go through their website to try to report an in-game player. In-game reporting has been a standard feature since Halo 2 for basically all online games. It is a thing that, like, you need, if you want to build a community and help, like, that community check itself, you need to give those players accessible means of reporting other players for behaving in ways, either, again, hacking the game or, shouting racial expletives or whatever it is that is behavior that should get them banned. And they're not going to add that kind of feature until, 15, 16 months after the game has been out on the market and they've been selling, their shit for stores and all that kind of stuff. That's like an unacceptable state. Like, that's not a finished product. That's so crazy that you have to wait that long for a feature like that to be added, which should have been, I think, a pretty high priority feature for your multiplayer online shooter game in fucking 2021 and 2022.
Yeah. I was just thinking about this, Sean. If you were born when Call of Duty 4 Modern Warfare came out, the original Modern Warfare for the kids.
Yes,
the new
you're
Modern
talking
Warfare
about the freshmen that I'm teaching were born in 2007 and 2008.
That was going to be my point. If you were born in 2007 when Call of Duty 4 came out, you are 14 or 15 years old now. you are going and getting your driver's permit. You are old enough to go drive a car. And yet, this game is going to be putting into beta sometime after the year's anniversary of the game's launch the basic idea of getting XP for kill streaks. Like, again, what are we talking about? The joke I've been making is like they're going to patch in the pause functionality. This might be more basic than even that. It's like so ludicrous. And like the mission replay thing. What the fuck is going on with the white whale of mission replay? Super Mario Brothers 3 on the NES lets you go replay one of the levels if you want to when you're going around the little world map. Like, what is going on? It's hard for me to imagine what the production pipeline is such that the absolute most basic functions of a multiplayer game in 2022 are just completely out of reach for 343 at this point. You know, so season 2, really stretching the boundaries of the word season by being almost a full year long.
There is only 1 month in the calendar that will go untouched by season 2 of Halo Infinite, and that is April. April will be the 1 month left out. I feel bad for April that there's, maybe they can just delay it a couple of extra weeks just to get a couple days in April so that season 2 could have technically been in every month of the year.
It takes a human woman or a person with a uterus only 9 months to build, grow an entire human child who will grow into a human being in their body and then deliver that. In the 10 months of Halo Infinite Season 2, we will get 2 actual new maps, 2 Forge maps, a couple of game modes that were in old Halo games. Is that it? Mission replay,
co-op in Forge beta, whatever the Forge beta is. Like, I don't know. Again, they haven't said like what is the extent of that and how is it actually implemented.
Just 10 months is a long time, guys. I don't know.
I mean, to put this into perspective, because we both play Genshin Impact. Around the time Season 2 of Genshin Impact launched, I think was when they did like the second Lantern Rite Festival. I know Halo Infinite launched like when Arataki Itto was added in the game. So it's like in the lifespan of Halo Infinite as a game, Genshin Impact has added like Enkanomiya. It did multiple different festivals, including the Lantern Rite Festival too. It's added probably about maybe 8 characters. It added the Chasm area, and it has now added the 3.0 update with Sumeru. And we've still got like 3 version updates until Season 2 ends in Genshin Impact. And it's like I don't think anyone is asking Halo Infinite to have that level of like really intensive updates and post-launch support. Like, I don't think a first-person shooter needs it the way that a game like Genshin Impact does need something close to that like cadence of releases. And the thing that's impressive about Genshin Impact is that it is such a kind of high-quality game, but maintains the cadence of release of like much cheaper mobile gacha games. Halo Infinite doesn't have to go up to that standard, but the fact that Halo Infinite like can't even like glimpse at that standard. It can't even like be in the same room as that standard. It can't be in the same fucking country as that standard. Is what's pathetic. I mean, Halo Infinite's post-launch support is so anemic that it is by far the least supported any Halo game has been after its launch. Maybe even arguably at this point, including the original Halo game, if you count the fucking PC version of the game, which added more new maps than they have in this. And more new weapons and stuff like that than they have in the almost a year that Halo Infinite has been out. It is now the worst supported Halo game post-launch, and it is a free-to-play multiplayer shooter in fucking 2022.
What do you think is Microsoft's strategy here? 343 has completely shit the bed. Maybe they've had resources taken away. I don't know. But like, what does Microsoft want out of their flagship franchise at this point? Are they just abandoning it?
I mean, they bought the Call of Duty people, so do they need Halo anymore? You own Call of Duty. Yeah, like, I don't know. I think that's like one of the things that's really bizarre about it is that like, I don't have any skin in the game anymore. Like I don't even like Halo Infinite. Like I didn't like it as much as like the people who liked it, and basically everyone has dropped off of this game. But there were lots of people like you, Jonathan, that like played a lot of it and liked it a lot at launch. And it's like the problem is that, it just didn't get any reasonable level of post-launch support at all. I didn't even like it that much and fell off of it because I have issues with some of its like core design stuff. So it's like, for me, I have no skin in the Halo Infinite game. I just have like a fascination with looking at it from the outside in as like, for that exact reason of like, what is going on? Like, why can... Like, it feels like Microsoft, just for the fucking life of them, they cannot shake their game dev shit, which is that, like, the only consistent, like, AAA thing they're able to put out is, like, Forza and Gears of War at this point, with, like, Gears of War 5 being very well liked. But, like, the whole Xbox One narrative of the issues with their, like, in-game, like, first-party or in-house first-party development stuff, like, it just feels like they've thrown so much money at the wall, they bought all these studios, and we're going an entire year without a single real like big Xbox first party release, and this is the state that Halo Infinite is in also, and it is just like, what the fuck is happening? Like, why? It just feels like we have been on the precipice. I felt like talking about Xbox and Microsoft and like their game stuff on this podcast for like 6 years or something, feeling like this is going to be the year where it's like they really come back, and you feel that like 360 era Microsoft is back and like hitting hard, and you're getting like 3 or 4 big games a year from their first party, and they're like just nailing it. And it feels like, again, we've been talking about that since like 2016 or so, since they started acquiring studios almost 6 years ago at this point. It's just like really weird to see Halo Infinite be in this state, and wondering like, your parent company spent $7 billion fucking dollars buying Activision Blizzard King. Like, how can they not get a reasonable amount of post-launch support out of their like flagship premier franchise that they are also making TV shows and comic books and books out of? How come you cannot get this ship righted after a year of this game being on the market?
At some point, I think there is going to be the tell-all article or maybe even book about what the fuck 343 even is. Because 343 was this studio that was developed for the sole purpose of making Halo shit, and they have been bad at making Halo shit from day one, basically. Like, it has been...
for longer than Bungie was making Halo shit. For quite a bit longer at this point. Years longer.
Yeah, because Halo 4 came out 2012, but they had some stuff before then.
Yeah, I mean, they did Halo... like Combat Evolved Anniversary Edition, I think, was the first game that 343 released.
And some of the things that they've done over the years have, been good or become good. There are good elements of Halo 4, but its post-launch support became a disaster. Halo 5 was a disaster at launch, and then post-launch disaster. Halo Master Chief Collection, abject disaster until now it's in a great state, but boy, that took a while.
Yeah.
And then now this, which is just one of the greatest disasters in video game history. To me, that just says there's something going on in like the management and structure of that studio that is like just holistically bad and probably needs to be torn up and started over. But I don't know. I don't make video games. But again, I liked Halo Infinite. I played a lot of it. I deleted it from my Xbox because my Xbox only has so much space, and nothing was happening in it, and it didn't work.
Yeah, I mean, there's just been so much turnover at that studio. I mean, Joseph Staten, who's, the old Bungie scriptwriter and stuff for Halo, who came onto the project, he's only been working on Halo Infinite for, 18 months to 2 years or something at this point?
Yeah.
Like, the game, I think he's the third or maybe even fourth creative lead for that game. So they've had, so much turnover at that studio. That I think that's a lot of the problem, is that they just couldn't maybe commit to a vision. They just couldn't keep people on the project for long enough. I've read a lot about that Microsoft in particular uses lots of contract work, and so people work on the game for a year or two, and then their contract runs out and they're off because they're not actually employed by the studio. That's just a thing that Microsoft as a tech company does a lot of, and it's relatively common in the industry, but from what I understand, Microsoft does it more. And so I see a lot of scuttlebutt online of people speculating that is the reason why Halo Infinite in particular has this problem. But it's just Halo Infinite has truly lived up to its subtitle in the most perfectly ironic way, right? Because it is a game that took 6 years to come out, which is twice as long as any other Halo game. Every Halo game came out basically 3 years after the last one. It took 6 years, or 7 years, I think, actually, ultimately, because it got delayed.
Yeah, it was. Yeah.
And then And so like it got delayed by a year, a month or two before the game was supposed to come out. Then the game comes out, and then a year later, it still feels like the game hasn't come out yet because they're still adding in Forge, they're still adding in co-op campaign. They canceled the split screen version of co-op campaign, which sucks. It is bullshit because they had said after Halo 5 very definitively, we understand our audience like really cares about local co-op because it's how they've enjoyed this game for like since 2001, and that we're going to make sure that feature comes back in our next game, and that's not happening. And they, basically just lied to their fan base about that, which is very annoying. And that and the most basic of shit, like in-game reporting, is not going to be in the game until March of next year. That's a game that is not done. That's a game that's not finished. That is like the kind of roadmap I would expect to see for an early access game, not a game that, again, should be hitting its like version 2.0 or whatever thing a year after its launch.
Yeah, they're not even at 1.0.
Yeah.
They're not even there. But should we talk about a game that's at 3.0?
Let's talk about a game that is very much at 3.0.
If Halo Infinite is just tiresomely undersupported, Genshin Impact is almost terrifyingly supported.
Yeah.
Because now we have Genshin Impact 3.0. It almost feels like the game does itself a disservice by saying they were only on 3.0. They've done a lot of updates, because every point update is also huge. But yes, we are at Genshin Impact 3.0, which means we have the new continent, new area of Sumeru. We have new story. We have new characters. We have new character quests. Like, this one is huge.
It's huge.
It feels it's definitely bigger than what 2.0 was at launch.
Yes.
Because... And like 2.0, they're going to be adding more to it in 3.1, 3.2. The story's not done, all of that stuff. But yeah, Sean, the other day, I was saying, my brother and I were talking about this. It's so good. And I was saying to him, man, sometimes I worry about talking about Genshin Impact on the podcast because I don't know how many times and in how many ways we can say this game is great. But then what Genshin Impact does is it is great in a way that is completely unlike the ways it's been great before, and now I want to talk about it again. And I think that describes my feelings on Sumeru in a nutshell. I absolutely am in love with this 3.0 update, and so much about what I love about Sumeru and some of the things they've added is stuff that is completely unlike the things I've loved in this game so far. It feels like such an act of discovery to be playing this, from the story to just the world itself, to the music. All of these things feel so fresh and new and vibrant. The game didn't need a reinvention, but it feels like it's kind of reinvented itself.
Yeah, I'm like honestly shocked by how good 3.0 is, because I think that they set such a high bar with 2.0, which was the first time they added in a full big new area, right? They had done the mountain area, Dragonspine Mountain. They had done like the temporary island stuff for the summer event, but they had never added, okay, now we're adding like a new Mondstadt, a new Leeway. We're like pushing forward. It's a whole version update to 2.0. And like 2.0 was so incredible and mind blowing and like just totally opened up that game and like I think kind of revolutionized it internally. And so I was kind of thinking, well, there's no way that 3.0 can like live up to that. And I was almost kind of nervous as like, are they going to be able to like up that ante again? Because I don't think it would be enough to just add in another continent and just get another batch of content like what 2.0 was and just sort of follow that formula. Because I think it would feel dissatisfying. I think you'd start to feel fatigued if it was just more and it wasn't different and better. And luckily it is different and it is better. Like, it's a lot. It is the biggest update, it must be, in terms of content they've done, because Sumeru is, they're going to add the desert area in 3.1. So we have the like forest section of the map, which is at least the landmass of Mondstadt. But it is much more playable area because there are so many underground areas that are so involved. It like Sumeru feels to me like someone at Hoyoverse listened to our Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild podcast, and I talked about that. Like, one of my big issues with that game is I didn't like that there weren't any caves, there weren't any tunnels and stuff like that. You couldn't go into the wells. Was a thing that frustrated me with Breath of the Wild, because it felt like it didn't have that kind of sense of dungeon exploring adventure to it. And Genshin Impact has always been good about having a decent amount of that stuff. But Sumeru has so much brewing under the surface of that map that I'm always shocked. It is almost like Elden Ring-esque when you go to the areas below Elden Ring and realize, oh my god, there's like huge stretches of this map that are underneath the surface and under the roots of these giant trees and all this stuff. So it's a huge amount of playable space. But it's also that like what you're doing in that playable space feels really satisfyingly different. The grapple hook type points that they have done has so changed. I think the way you feel and how you explore the areas is extremely satisfying. It is a huge like sort of upgrade over some of the stuff they did in Inazuma with the like lightning points that you zipped to, but it's much more sort of prominent in Sumeru. I think the whole like vibe of the world and the story and like the sort of romanticism thing they've done of the forest that is like this sort of like dreamlike forest, and then the like harsh bureaucratic academia and the contrast of that nation and how that informs all the major quest lines. And then you've got also this hugely elaborate quest line with the Aranara, or the Aranara, however you want to pronounce it, the little forest spirits, that is, I finished last night, is so massive. It is like the biggest single quest line in any that they've ever done in Genshin Impact, and it touches every area of the map and takes you everywhere and does all this stuff. There's so much material. And then on top of all that, they added in a whole new element that you could, or a whole new playable element of Dendro, that has like, I think, really revitalized some of the combat stuff, particularly with Electro-style characters, and all the new Dendro, the 3 new Dendro characters of the Dendro Traveler, Kole, and Tinari, who I got Tinari the other day, have played a bit with, has like really opened up the combat in all these crazy ways. So it just feels like, yeah, it's not just here's more Genshin Impact. It's like, here's the next level of Genshin Impact is really what they've delivered with this update, which now that we're almost at 2 years, we'll hit like a week or two. It'll be 2 years since the game's release. It is crazy to me that they're still able to push that bar that much further.
It's crazy to think it's only been 2 years.
Yeah.
Because so much has been added. But no, I agree with all of that. I am really bowled over because, and I will admit, I had some fatigue setting over the summer with Genshin Impact. And there have been periods where I've stepped away from it, and that's fine. I think the game is actually very good about letting you step away if you want. But like, I thought the Golden Apple Archipelago stuff this summer, which I did not finish because it was so ludicrously overlong, that felt to me like what you were saying earlier about like, well, what if it's just the same thing again, but more? That kind of felt like this is Genshin, but just a lot of Genshin. This is like you went and bought Genshin at Costco, and you got way more of it than you intended to. You know, you bulk bought Genshin. And so I had felt a little fatigued with it. And then 3.0 came out, and I picked it up, and I just immediately fell in love. I think Sumeru as a place just... it is maybe the peak of their storytelling through the environment. And I would have thought you couldn't do that better than Inazuma because they did such a masterful job there. But immediately Sumeru feels like a world unto itself. The world feels so lived in and full and personal. The main Archon quest story, which you didn't even really touch on in that long list of things you listed, but like the main plot you go through is 110% different than anything else you've done in Genshin Impact. It starts out as kind of like the opposite of the Inazuma stuff, because in Inazuma you go there and you're immediately embroiled in a big civil war, and there's the whole vision hunt decree, and like it's very hectic and there's a lot going on. And when you go to Sumeru, at first it's just a lot of like getting to know the world, getting to know some people. It's very chill. It's all world building. I think it's super charming, and I loved learning about the world. And then the second half of it is by far the most ambitious story thing I think they've done in terms of one quest line. And it blew me the fuck away. All of that's amazing. And then there's just, I don't think I've done as much of it as you have, because you were describing things in there that I haven't really touched yet. I've done a little bit of the Aranara story, but yeah, there keeps being more of it. And I think the Dendro stuff just immediately, like the first thing it made me realize is like, oh, I have not played with the protagonist character in forever. I don't think I touched the electric protagonist. And yet, Dendro, main character, that's a ton of fun. And like I was building new team compositions, and I've been doing all sorts of experimenting with my teams. I actually got Tinari on day one. The first thing I did when 3.0 launched is I launched the game. I did a 10 pull. I got Tinari. It was total luck. So I have used him quite a bit, and I'm loving that character. And there's still so much that I have not had time to go into. Like, I haven't done Tinari's character story yet.
I haven't done that either yet.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah, it's crazy how much stuff there is in this game that I haven't
because we didn't talk about there's the whole for the 3.0, like there's the entire like carvings quest, and so there's the carving stuff, but then that brings with it's an entire like mini battle pass or whatever you want to call it, where you get all your different rewards, and there's like 8 different tabs and a million different like combat challenges, and there's traversal challenges, and I have finished all of that, but that took a while because there's so much of that. It's really masterful. It's amazing how much is in here and how vital and new it feels. We obviously can't forget the music. The music is maybe the best it's ever been. It's absolutely out of this world. I don't know what they're doing over there. I feel like somebody in 2016 made a monkey's paw wish of like, I want to make the greatest video game ever, and the monkey paw curled and said, you get it, but everything else in the world becomes shit. And I think that's maybe what Genshin Impact is, because this is dark magic, Sean. This is weird.
Yeah, it's just incredible. So I think we should like try to like break this down into chunks, and I think the first thing I want to talk about is just like Sumeru, the new country, and like exploring and stuff, because it's been a long time since we had a big new explorable area, particularly one that wasn't like Enkanomiya or the Chasm, that was more sort of like narrowed and focused. I think one of the things that's really cool about Sumeru is that it is the first time since the game's launch that they have had a big continuous area to explore, in the sense of Inazuma was all the different islands, right, which was great and was like worked really well with that structure, and there was something very fun about the like sort of almost episodic nature of Inazuma as an exploratory region, because it was like, okay, here's Narukami Island, I'll like explore here, and there's the shrine and all that stuff, and then eventually you move on to like Watatsumi Island, or the one with like the big forge, or the one with the Musojin Gorge in it, with the big cutout that had lightning on it, and you solve the quest and you fix the lightning that is always there. And that was like a really cool way to structure Inazuma, and it felt like it fixed some of the sort of maybe like issues or whatever deficiencies in some of the design of Mondstadt and Liyue, where those areas were a little bit too sprawling, and there was like too much kind of gaps between things that you could find and something to do, or quests or treasure chests and stuff like that. And Sumeru, going back to, okay, here's a Mondstadt or Liyue style area. Here's an area that is like one big continent, not a bunch of like different little islands that are separated, that you have to like get on your boat or teleport between. And them reapproaching that style design of a big landmass, but bringing everything they've learned about the sort of verticality and layering and building in the incredible density of material that you get, I think makes Sumeru, to me, is like the most satisfying exploration of any of the regions in the game, because it has both the very seamless nature of the first 2 regions from 1.0, but it also has that sort of depth that you came to expect, that you saw like them doing in like Dragonspine, was them like sort of testing it out, and then you got a lot more in like Inazuma and Enkanomiya and the Chasm, where there's so many layers to what you're exploring. I feel like Sumeru has like the best of both those worlds, and I've spent a lot of time exploring, and I'm constantly finding so much new stuff, and kind of like having to change my perspective on what I'm looking at. Or you can, in some of the Aranara quest line, you unlock abilities that allow you to unlock new areas and stuff like that. There's a whole Ocarina of Time-esque system where you can get these songs that allow you to do things while you're exploring. There's like a lot going on there that to me is, I'm always impressed that they're able to like make the exploration feel fresh. It's not you're just exploring in a different place. You're looking at the whole place differently than I think how you explored in Inazuma or Liyue or Mondstadt.
It's so true. And something I've been thinking about, because I don't feel like I anywhere near have my head around Sumeru as like an entire region, and like what all I can do or where I can go, and I've done a lot of exploring. And a big kind of like, oh my god moment for me is when you finish the entire main Archon quest, chapters 1 and 2, or acts 1 and 2 of chapter 3, right, which is the 4th chapter. When you finish all of that, that's when you get the reputation system for Sumeru. And one of the things in the reputation system is it gives you reputation for your overall progress of what you've unlocked in the region. And I thought I'd explored a lot, and then it told me, you're at 12%. And you don't even have the first reward. You're at 12%. And I'm like, oh, there's a lot of this, isn't there? And I was thinking also about, just there's so much potential. And I've been thinking about how Inazuma, it doesn't feel like it's been an entire year for me since Inazuma launched. Because in that year, I've spent so much time there. It's opened up to me so much. It became like my new home base in Genshin.
Yes.
Whereas the first year, I spent all my time in Mondo and Liyue. I mean, those were the places, obviously. But I found myself, I'll go spend time in Mondo and Liyue sometimes. But mostly, my main home base is Inazuma. That's where I go to do my crafting and my questing. And I just like being in Inazuma. And I know that area really, really well. But I didn't know it really well on day one, right? It's something that I slowly discovered over the course of the year. And I've mostly absolutely adored this last year of Genshin Impact. And one of the most exciting things for me playing Sumeru so far is the thought of, we have a year to enjoy this. We have a year of stuff they're going to add, and not even if they didn't fucking add anything, just time to go explore the area and learn what's already there. Like, I am so jazzed right now for the next year of stuff we get to do in Genshin Impact, where Sumeru will become our home base, and we'll really get to know this area, because for all the reasons you just said, this is an area I really want to get to know. I think that verticality and density, you're absolutely right, it's something they have gotten better and better and better at. It's so funny, when I'm doing, just the basic, go get your gold, get your books, quests, on the map, the ley lines. I usually just go to Mondo because it's easy and the terrain is flat and it's really quick to do those. But when you go back to Mondstadt, or I always say Mondo because that's what they say in Japanese.
Right,
But when you go there, it feels so kind of barren compared to what comes later in the game because it's such a simple, area. And it is so funny to go to Sumeru and it is so dense. It's like you're stepping into... Honestly, this is the closest anyone's going to come to making an actual, good video game out of James Cameron's Avatar or something, right?
Oh, yeah.
This is the kind of, and I'm not saying, this is like Avatar, but there's something like that of, it's a big fictional ecosystem. And that's the cool thing about Avatar. I know the story and stuff in Avatar is boring, but I love the production design of Cameron imagined this biosphere, this entire ecosystem that everything interlocked. And I feel like Sumeru is like that in the world of Genshin Impact, and it's so fun to just go around and see things. I love the color scheme, I love all the green and all of that kind of stuff, but also, you're dealing with trees, and you're dealing with how the trees intersect with the water, and how the water then intersects with the different plants, and there's all these environmental puzzles and elemental puzzles, and it's definitely one of those areas where you pick a direction and walk, and you will have fun, and you will discover new things. Definitely, it feels like Elden Ring, but cheery in some ways,
And it's something where it just feels like they really... And it's true of what they did with Inazuma as well. They really thought about, how do we thematize the nature of exploring around the kind of area that it is, right? And so Inazuma, it's an island region, so we thematize it around these kind of pocket stories and the kind of fractured nature of the narrative you got there. Whereas Sumeru, well, what is Sumeru? Or at least this region of Sumeru. Again, there's going to be the kind of Egypty desert region they're going to add in 3.1, but it's a jungle forest. So what do you have? You've got giant trees. You've got these thickets. And then you have the roots underneath, and that feels like that's really how they've designed the whole area, is that kind of sense of you're going up into these treetops or on these giant crazy fantasy mushrooms. They have their sort of Sonic the Hedgehog or Sonic and Knuckles Mushroom Hill Zone bouncy mushrooms that are one of my favorite video game things. I love, give me a good bouncy mushroom, and the genius of whoever on that design team said, well, we've got this electro dendro reaction that supercharges it or whatever. What if we did that, and we did that with the mushrooms, so you can zap the mushrooms and you can supercharge the mushrooms? Fucking that dude, whoever that person was, deserves a raise, because that is such a fucking great, unique concept that it's only Genshin Impact has the gameplay mechanics that you would even consider that you zap the mushrooms and it makes you do a super jump. But it means that you can climb up into these trees, into these giant mushrooms and all this crazy shit. But then also you have these big caves that are underneath all the roots of the trees, and you're rooting around down there, and there's all this water and stuff, and there's some stuff you can do in some of the areas where you kind of can change the water level to reveal more. And that is so satisfying that it feels this very kind of thematic concept of how you explore that. because we have all these different regions, you get to appreciate conceptually how exploring a jungle is different than exploring island nations, which is a thing that I don't really feel like I've ever approached in a game before, because games aren't built like that normally. It's like, exploring one side of the map in Skyrim is the exact same thing as exploring the other side of the map in Skyrim. Like, Breath of the Wild has a little bit of it with some of the environmental stuff that keeps it a little bit fresh, but conceptually, in sort of like the feel of it, it's like, well, no, you're still just finding shrines, you're still just finding like this stuff. You're taking a couple of different things into account, but the nature of how you're exploring and how you're seeing the world is not different. Whereas in Genshin Impact, it's like running around in Sumeru feels substantially different than running around in Inazuma, and that's pretty insane from like a game design level to me.
And that is, I think going to be the enduring creative lesson of Genshin Impact is that's the benefit of a live game like this, right?
Yes.
Because it's not just that these developers had all their skills on day one and are just executing a plan they wrote years ago. This is all clearly they got better at it over time from trying this out, and then we try this out, and then we use that and we build on this. And that is really the benefit of this model. And I think certainly in the United States, and I think English language journalism on games, there is definitely still, and I think understandably, a bias against, live games and anything that sort of purports to be something that is going to kind of evolve over time, because our examples for it are shit like Halo Infinite and,
Marvel's
Cyberpunk
The Avengers.
Cyberpunk, and like a lot of games that shouldn't have to be added on to, that need to be, and stuff like that. And we just have a lot of bad examples of it. But Genshin Impact, I think, is a really cool example of how you can give an audience something that feels complete and full as it goes along, but gets better and better because the developers are learning alongside the player base about what works and what doesn't, and what ways they can kind of like push the envelope on what they're doing. And that, I think, eternally is the fun of Genshin Impact, is every time they add something, it feels like they're learning as they go.
Yeah. I mean, I knew that they had like really nailed how much fun it is to zip around Sumeru with the grappling hooks and the mushrooms and all that stuff when I was doing my commissions in Leeway, because I'm guessing they're probably, because you can't do commissions in Sumeru yet, and I'm guessing that those aren't going to get unlocked until the desert's added or something like that. But I was in Leeway doing my daily commissions, and there was like a mountain or hill I was going to go over, and I was spinning the camera around looking for one of the grapple points or a mushroom.
Yes.
I was like, oh, I just have to climb up normally. It was like, it had been a while since I had been so conditioned and had so much fun zipping up and shooting the little like plants that shoot the grapple points around and stuff like that, that I had like already, in just like a week and a half or whatever of this update being out, become so accustomed to that way of thinking and looking at the world that I had to be like, no, I'm in Leeway. This is like fake China, not like fake Persia. I have to like change my perspective on all this stuff again.
I know, that is my biggest frustration. And again, if they don't have it ready yet, that's fine. I don't need there's so much going on here. I don't need the commissions there yet, but I want the commissions in Sumeru because I don't want to leave, right?
Yes.
I don't want to go do it in other areas because the other areas aren't as fun or as new to me, which just honestly, that's praise, right? They did a really good job. I don't want to leave.
Although there is one thing, this is maybe we can transition to this part of the topic. There's one thing that, like, I don't know, this shouldn't have blown my mind, but it was maybe the most mind-blowing thing of the update in this weird little tiny way, was when I was doing one of those commissions, and I was fighting one of like the shaman hilichurls that have like the dendro reactions that have been in the game since 1.0. Like, dendro has been an element that a couple of enemies can use, like the shamans, forever. It's just the only elemental reaction dendro had was burn, which is dendro and pyro. But I was fighting one of those shamans, and I was using a Hydro character. Because I was using Hydro character because the Dendro Shaman did one of his spells that did like the vines or whatever, and I was shooting water arrows with Yelan, and it popped out one of the little seeds that is from the new Dendro reaction. That's the little seeds on the ground that you can explode. And it's like my mind blew because I was running around in like Mondstadt or whatever, and the new elemental reaction happened from an enemy that's been in the game since 1.0, and I was just like, what the fuck? It's like, because it felt like I didn't like envision, oh right, all this stuff, like that kind of thing leaks backwards through all the content that has existed, because Dendro has been in the background of this game since it came out. There's something about getting the brand new elemental reaction and all that shit I was doing in Sumeru, but it was some random hill churl on a hill in Mondstadt doing his little spell that I've killed maybe literally a million of those fucking dudes at this point in the game, and having the little seed pop out and being like, oh, right, I can switch to Bennett or whoever and blow this thing up and get this new elemental reaction. And that has been a crazy thing about this update, is they have never added new elemental reactions. They've never added a new element to the game. This is the first time they have done that, and it has been really cool to get such a like sort of tangible, direct mix-up of the way you think about elemental reactions and team compositions, because now there's a whole different side of things to consider, particularly for Electro and Hydro characters, which are the ones that benefit from the new reactions.
Yes, I could not agree more. I had actually a similar kind of feeling of that, Sean, where when I would go back to Mondo or Liyue or whatever, I would switch my team over to one of my kind of existing teams, and then I would realize, no, I can use the Dendro stuff wherever I want in the game. I can go to like these old bosses and fight with Dendro, and it feels like it's all new because it's a new element. And Dendro, it's not just that they added a new element, but I think they were very savvy in adding an element that works with all these other elements in such interesting new ways, because it's just completely not, I mean, the combat has always been and always will be fun. It's like the hidden secret of Genshin Impact is just how deep the combat runs.
Yeah.
But having the Dendro just completely animates it in a way that I don't think it has been before, because I find myself more invested in the meta aspect of it than I've ever been. Like, I was watching a video on how best to use Tinari, and that's the first time I've ever gone and watched that kind of thing. I've sometimes looked up some little guides suggesting things, but I've never been that into it. But I was just fascinated by it.
I mean, it's really interesting because, you know, there's not like since Dendro works differently than the other elements in the sense that it doesn't react with cryo, is the only which, you know, they've had for in their 6 elements since 1.0, which is pyro, cryo, hydro, and electro. Those 4 elements are have always felt like the primary elements because they all react with everything. Then you have these 2 kind of catalyst elements, which were Anemo and Geo, which Anemo reacts the same to all those other 4 elements. It swirls. Geo reacts the same. It crystallizes. It makes a shield. And then Anemo and Geo do not interact with each other. So they're like catalysts for these 4 kind of like primary elements. And now Dendro is another kind of catalyst style element, but it doesn't react with cryo. And its pyro reaction is like fine, but it's kind of like not amazing. Again, the burn reaction has been in the game since 1.0. You just have never been able to intentionally do it with a character. But what they have done is they've taken their 2 reactions with Dendro that they've added, the Hydro one and the Electro one, and they've created a new sort of concept where they are like sort of, they branch out. So it's like you do that reaction, and then from that reaction, there are then 2, for each of them, 2 other potential reactions that can happen. So if you do Dendro and Hydro, that creates a little seed that like pops out of the character and then falls on the ground on the battlefield. And that seed will just explode over time and do Dendro damage if you leave it, or if you produce enough of them. I think there's only like 5 that can be on the field at a time. So you're producing a shit ton of them. They'll all just start exploding. And doing damage. But if you hit one of those seeds with Electro, it turns into like a little vine arrow thing that shoots and does damage at specific targets. But if you hit them with Pyro, they do a much bigger explosion and do a big AoE damage thing. So it's like if you're wanting to maximize your single target damage, you can build this sort of like Hydro, Dendro, Electro reaction, and it's like a double stage reaction. Or if you want to focus on AoE stuff, you can do the same thing, but with Hydro, Dendro, and Pyro. And then there's a similar thing with the Dendro Electro thing, but that's more, it does like a buff to your damage, and how you follow up on it with either Electro or Dendro changes the nature of that buff. But the point being that those reactions, while they didn't add a cryo one, the 2 that they added are the most complicated reactions that are in the game. And it feels like an appropriate thing that they looked at it and said, I feel like they focus on, let's do like a quality over quantity type thing. And instead of trying to make sure that it interacts with everything, because it doesn't do anything with Anemo and Geo, which makes sense because I think it's in a similar category as those 2 elements. But they thought, let's take our reactions that we are adding and really think about what can we do that's different. And it's this double staged thing that you're kind of setting up these combos, and it makes your rotations really interesting. And I feel like every new Dendro team I've put together, especially now that I have all 3 of them, I'm thinking about combos in different ways. Like I'm thinking about, okay, I'll hit them with Dendro, and then I'll do Yelan and use Yelan to do some Hydra stuff, and then I'll switch to Bennett and just use Bennett's burst to explode all these things on the ground and make a giant explosion. And it's a combo in a way that I've never really thought about before, because that concept hasn't existed in the game. And then particularly for Electro characters, it gives them like this whole new life that makes them really powerful if you know what you're doing. Because Electro has long been, I think, one of the weaker elements in general in terms of the reactions that it can do. But with Dendro, you can just stack so much damage so quickly. And it has really, I feel like I've changed a lot of my old staple teams. I'm now putting Dendro in different ways and seeing how it works and creating all these cool new synergies with teams I've been using for fucking over 2 years, or like almost 2 years at this point in the game.
And for me, when I first started playing in Sumeru, and honestly for like the first week I had the update, I was playing with a team built around the protagonist, because I did make sure I had a team for the protagonist, because I like to have the protagonist in the Archon quests and all that. But also, I think this is a much more interesting protagonist to play with than they've had for a while. Like, because I think the very first version of the protagonist you get, which is the Anemo protagonist, that's the one you started with, she/he, whichever one you're using, but for me it's a she. She was fun because it's the first one. You start out in Mondo, that's the one you have, and because the way Anemo works, swirling the other elements, I think it was a good one to like onboard you into the game. With your protagonist as the center and then the other characters. I think they've recreated that feeling in Sumeru with the Dendro protagonist, who is a pretty basic version of the Dendro thing, but one that makes it easy to learn and but hard to master the entire Dendro idea. So I kind of I realized, okay, this is how Dendro works. And then I kind of just tossed a team together with sort of parts, but I had fun with it. It was just other characters I'd kind of been working on or had. So I had the protagonist in the lead. I threw Kazuha in there because I'd been using Kazuha a lot. And I was also adding Bennett and Mona, because I thought, okay, I want to get the seeds wet, and then I want to use Bennett. And that team has turned out to be very powerful, and I still use them for some things, because just throwing the Dendro on the field, having Mona get it wet, grow the seeds, having Bennett do some explosions, and then having Kazuha come in and swirl, and just everything goes together and does massive damage, became a really powerful mode for me. And exactly as you're saying, Sean, it's made me think about the sequence of the characters and how I'm switching through them, and it added this kind of rhythm to combat for me of what order am I doing things in to make these big reactions. And I don't think I've ever thought that deeply about the combat myself. Like, I am not someone who's super engaged on that meta side of it. For a long time, honestly, I put teams together based on the characters I liked, which is fine. That's a fun way to play Genshin. There's nothing wrong with it. Yeah,
and the game is designed that it's totally, you can, other than the Abyss stuff, you can totally play through the whole game with a kind of decent-ish team that you're not optimizing the team composition or anything.
Exactly. And then I think it was with Inazuma, I really decided to kind of start a clean slate. And I slowly, over the course of the 2 and 2.1, I created a team of all 5-star Inazuma characters that I used for a while. And that got changed and added over time. And that's when I started thinking about it more. But, really this one has thrown me into a mode where I had a lot of fun just slapping together that protagonist team. And then I've been trying to tinker around with the best one for Tighnari. And the one I've landed on for Tighnari at the moment, I'm still kind of getting to know, because I don't quite have him all the way leveled up yet, but enough that I can use him, and he's crazy powerful when you start putting all the pieces together. And I know there's lots of things I could kind of swap in and out, too. So, and yeah, it's having me also go and grab characters that I just haven't used a lot before, like Fischl has become one of the MVPs of Genshin Impact with Dendro stuff, right?
Yeah, I mean, Fischl has always been a really powerful character, but Dendro is effectively a sort of subtle buff or whatever. It's it feels like it is a balance patch in some ways, also for Electro to make it more powerful, because it was it just never did as much damage as the melt or vaporize reactions, but since Fischl was already really fucking good, it has made her crazy fucking good with Dendro.
Right. But I just hadn't kind of had a place for her on a team before now. I'd use her once in a while, but I had leveled her up a little bit during the summer event where Fischl was a main character, because I got a new costume for her, and she looks cool. She looks dope. Every single one of the new costumes they've added looks better than the costume it replaced, and I think that's a good track record they're on. But anyway, so, using her and some other characters I've kind of... Because, like, Mona, I hadn't used in a while, but Mona's great. And Mona works with the Dendro stuff really well because of just the way she... and there's lots of Hydro characters will work, but, she's great. It's been a ton of fun.
It's super fun. I mean, I think one of the things that was awesome was I feel like I had sort of been stuck using a lot of teams that were like Pyro, Yelan and Jingchu, and Bennett. That was like Yoimiya or Hu Tao, and one of the reasons I was using these teams is I did get Clay in the summer event, which means, Jonathan, I do currently have every Genshin Impact character. I'm finally there, almost 2 years in. And I did spend $30 to get T90 because I was close enough. And I was like, yeah, this update's so good. I'm going to give you the fucking $30 like for a couple of rolls to hit pity and get him. Because I
had to spend $30 to get Kazuho for the summer, so
yes.
I get it. I was the same
It was
place.
the first time since I had actually like bought currency in a long time. That I was like, you have very well earned it, Genshin Impact, with this update. But anyway, so I had been kind of stuck with those teams for a while, and it was fun at first. Because Yelan is a very fun character. I really love playing as her. But it's like it was a very samey team comp, and it was so much of like, okay, set up your water arrows with your 2 support characters, put your Bennett thing down, and then just hit them with a bunch of pyro stuff. And I'd been using that for a while because I'd just gotten used to it, and they hadn't added in like a new character for a bit. And then when it came to this to the Sumeru update, the thing I thought was, because it's the same thing I did with Inazuma, I tried to think of like a team where I could put some characters on the team where I could justify in my head that those characters would like be adventuring around in the world. So it felt like a canonical team or whatever in my head, and I thought it's fun to put together teams with that kind of restriction. So I did Yoimiya because I thought, well, Yoimiya would go adventuring around the world every once in a while and go like exploring and get out of Inazuma. Yelan because she's a spy and so she'd be investigating. The Dendro Traveler, obviously, because it's, he's, I gotta have the Traveler there. And then Bennett, because Bennett is an adventurer, so it's his job to go adventuring. And so I put together...
Boken.
Yes, exactly. And so I put together that team, and all I basically did was take what was my Yoimiya team for a while after I got on Yelan and replaced Jingchu with the Dendro Traveler, and I was shocked by, like very quickly after I got like my artifacts on my Traveler update and stuff like that, that's just a better team. Like I didn't think about, because I didn't even know how the Dendro shit really worked yet. I didn't think about a team composition other than as like, well, this probably works fine. And even if the Dendro Traveler sucked, that team would still do more than enough damage to clear whatever content I had. But like that is just straight up a better team than having both Yelan and Jingchu. And that was like very fun to be like, oh shit. And then I went and I grabbed my Clay team and I put Dendro in there with Clay. And Clay's not like she's not as good as Yoimiya. She's like the weakest of the Pyro main DPS characters. But her whole thing is themed around explosions, and when the new Dendro Pyro thing is setting up giant explosions that are actually like explosions, like it's like a giant fireball that goes off, that is by far the most fun way to play Clay, because you're just you're just putting a bunch of those little seeds on the ground, and then you're throwing her fucking cluster bomb skill, and just everything explodes, and it does so much damage, and it has got to be the biggest AoE thing you can do in the game in terms of damage. It's fucking crazy. And that was when I like immediately fell in love with Dendro, was being like, oh, it took this team that I had like played to death at this point, this dynamic of the 2 Hydra supports and my 2 Pyro characters, and then just replacing one of the Hydras with a Dendro not only made the team more fun to play because it's way more active, I was like getting way better damage ultimately at the end of it. And that's where I feel like you can see how it's both very fun to play, but it is also, I think, is like it legitimately is changing up the meta in an exciting way. If you're someone who cares about trying to get that more optimized performance out of your characters, like the Dendro shit is like fucking real. Like it really is changing up the way that you think about the game, and the teams you can make with Dendro are as good as, if not oftentimes better than, a similar type team that have like a flex slot that you're just throwing another Hydra character in or something like that. Like you're really like pushed to think about how you can optimize using all those elements together.
Yeah, and for me, it's also just been a chance, and this is what Inazuma was for me too, to just like, okay, let's start over. Sometimes I'll use characters I've used in the past year, obviously, but I'm not using any existing team compositions, because like my main like first slot team since 2.0 launched has been a version of having Kokomi, Raiden Shogun. Why am I forgetting Ice Girl's name?
Ayaka?
Ayaka. And then that last slot was Yoimiya. Eventually it was Zhongli for me for a while when he had his reroll. But that one was kind of a flex slot. And that's kind of been my number 1 team. I've had various number 2 teams. My number 2 team lately since the Arataki Ito came out is I've had him and just my cool Geo boy and girl team. I don't have all the Geo boys, so instead of the last guy, I've had Ningguang in there as sort of the other one. But I've had Ningguang, Zhongli, Garo, and Ito, and that's maybe still my favorite team to play as because it just destroys shit.
Yeah, Geo teams are fun.
Geo teams are fun. But then I have not gone in and tweaked those 2 teams. Their slots 1 and 2, and then my other slots, which, by the way, thank you, Genshin, you added more slots for teams. That is,
oh my god. When I saw that option, you can add 10 teams, it's like, fucking thank god, because I'm someone, I change teams all the time. And so, like, being able to just go in and, like, being like, I can finally just have my fun Ganyu Melt team, like, just in that slot, because I like to use that team every once in a while, but it constantly was, like, I only have 4 slots, so I was constantly having to mix things up, and so, like, Geo Boys will forever be enshrined in one of my 10 team slots, because I'm always going to want to occasionally go back and use Geo Boys, and it killed me when I had to break that team up every once in a while, because I didn't have enough slots for all the teams I wanted.
Yes, exactly. And you guys, this isn't a video podcast, so you didn't see when I said that. Sean put his hands together like he was praying to God, thanking God for the rain that saved the crops. But it was more teams on Genshin. No, but yeah, so I've just started new teams, and I have one that is sort of built around the Traveler, and I have one that's built around Tinari, and then I've kind of been tweaking with another one. But it's, it's super fun to just kind of start fresh and say, okay, what is an all-new combo I can do based around these new characters and elements? And I love that it's like pushing me to do that I'm spending time when I'm not playing Genshin thinking about new combos to try and stuff like that. That's a really cool place to be in. And I don't have as many characters as you do, Sean. There's some I'm missing. I have a lot. I probably have more than the average player. I have a lot of the characters, and it's fun to just go in and be like, who haven't I used in a while? And let's try some stuff out, and it's super cool.
Yeah, I know I've seen buzz that, like, a lot of people are, like, starting to use Toma more because the way his pyro, like, timing works really well with Dendro stuff, and I haven't done a Toma team with it. But that's exciting because he's a character that went underused for a long time. Kei-Ching, our Electro Sword Girl from Liyue, who's been in the game forever. I've done a Kei-Ching team with Dendro, and it has, like, totally revolutionized that character, is now, like, really good, and she was very kind of a mid-tier character for a long time in terms of her damage output. It's just, like, it has so revitalized it. It's the biggest change to the balance I think the game has received ever. Like, the previous biggest change, I think, was when they added Kokomi, because Kokomi opened up, like, so many team compositions in a way that, like, people did not understand when she came out, and now she's, like, one of the most desired characters in the game. She also is
a queen here too. Yeah,
yes, she's really vital to my main Tinari team I'm using, which is Tinari, Yaimiko, who Yaimiko also has gotten, like, effectively buffed by this patch because she's so good. Her synergy with Tinari is crazy. The timing just, like, works really perfect. Then I'm using Kole on that team because Kole is adorable and I love her. She's not, I think, actually as good as the Dendro Traveler, but she's so adorable and I like having her on my team. And then Kokomi is my 4th slot, and so it's like, Kokomi is just like a standard at this point. She's so good. But anyways, like, Dendro has just, like, really opened up the game totally. And Tinari as the, like, new Dendro main DPS character is hugely fun. And I haven't, like, played enough with him to feel like I fully optimized everything with that character, but I can already tell that, like, his rotations are really interesting because his skill sets him up to be able to use 3 shots of his charged burst really quick, and that does a huge amount of damage. But those shots last longer than the cooldown on that skill. So, like, if you're timing it well, you can get your rotations around such that you're, like, buffing him up and everything. You can use his 3 shots, use his burst, use the skill again, use 3 shots again, and then reset everything for your rotation. Once you start getting that timing down, you can really get a just stupid amount of damage because it's just like 1,000 crazy weird, like, Dendro arrows flying through the air and killing everything. Because then you also have, like, all the elemental reactions shooting seeds all over the place. Like, when you get that Dendro shit popping off, it makes the whole screen goes crazy in a way that is very satisfying.
It's great. I have only so far played this update on PS5, but I would be curious to go play it on my iPad or something where you will, because the iPad runs at a higher frame rate, but it's also more inconsistent. Because I feel like Dendro would just fucking tank the frame rate or something at some points because it just pops off so much crazy shit. I love seeing how much stuff just gets thrown on screen. It's great.
Yeah, it's absolutely awesome. So let's talk about some of the characters in like a story way, because they've added three. So we have three new playable characters if you include Dendro Traveler. They have two new playable characters if you don't count that, which is Kole and Tinari. And then you get kind of like a nice preview with story stuff of a bunch of the other characters like Dishia and Al Hytham and Nilo, and Nahida, who is the Dendro Archon. And so you get a nice kind of tour of a bunch of the characters that they'll be releasing in the next few updates. And all of them, I think, are awesome. Every character I've met, I've loved. I think the voice acting is great. There's a bunch of really great actors that are in the game with this, particularly Hisako Kanemoto, who plays Nilo, who was Squid Girl in Squid Girl. Which was one I could not place when I heard Nilo talking. I'm like, I know this voice really well, but it was like, oh, it sounds like when Squid Girl is trying to be sweet, but she's actually being mischievous. And that's basically what Nilo's voice is. And it's like, okay, yes, that's who that actress is. But yeah, every character. There's Dory, the merchant, who is fucking crazy, and if you are not playing in Japanese, you are missing so much. I watched the English trailer because they put out the trailer for that character the other day, and I watched the English version of that trailer just to hear the voices. Like, oh no, the English lady's just giving a fine but totally normal performance, and then I forget the name of the actress who plays her Japanese. It's whoever played Chiyo in the Azumanga Daioh anime adaptation, but she's like just giving the most unhinged fucking performance, and it's amazing. But yeah, every character has been amazing. I've loved all of them. I'm super excited to get more of them and see more of the story.
Yes, absolutely. It's actually kind of crazy just how many characters they've introduced that, because they have the visions, they have the Kami no Me is how I think of it, because it's in.
Yeah.
This is something I want to talk about later. I am realizing more and more that I am confused by the proper nouns in English when like there's not voices on screen, because I just kind of prefer the Japanese ones. But yeah, Dory, by the way, is Kaneda Tomoko, or yes. Kaneda Tomoko. Anyway, yes, amazing performance. But yeah, there's so many characters who have the visions on their hips that I'm like, oh, we've got a lot of characters we're going to play as soon, and they've just previewed all of them for us, and I kind of want them all. But yes, Dory seems like she will be an awesome 4-star that everyone will love.
Yeah, she'll be in the second half of the update.
Okay.
Yes, and yeah, she's got like, I watched the trailer. She's like all of her shit. She's like riding on a little like genie or whatever. Like, it's pretty fucking crazy.
Yeah, because like I'm looking forward to the point where I'm building teams with entirely Sumeru characters, because that's when Inazuma got really fun for me. Is when I just stopped using existing characters and I had an all Inazuma team, and I'm excited to be able to do that with Sumeru in a couple updates from now.
Yeah, and it makes sense with how good the Electro synergy is that Dory is an Electro character, so that that's going to be the next new character they add in the second half of the update. Yeah. For me, I think the character I like the most, particularly in terms of like the main characters, is Kole is the most adorable character in the game, and this is a character. This is a game that has fucking Clay in it, and Kole has like the most like adorable little sister energy of any character in Genshin, and a lot of it is the voice performance is so good. The like how she's like very nervous, and she like and she really wants to be like Amber and put herself out there and be this like really energetic go-getter kind of person, but really she's a pretty like sort of introverted kind of gloomy person inside, and so she's trying to like kind of fight her nature to be the person that she wants to be, and you're like just sitting there on the sidelines going like, you can do it, Cole, like yes. It's why, like, even though again I don't think her burst is not as good as Dendro Traveler, so from like an optimized perspective I'd probably put the Dendro Traveler on the team, but it's like I'm rooting for Cole the whole time, so it's like I gotta put you on my team. She's got a boomerang with her skill, which is very fun.
Yes, no, Cole is absurdly adorable. This is in the Carvings quest line, but it is still voiced, is where you go to the tree and the writer guy who tells the stories is so excited that there's the weird panda bear things they've got. What, R&R? No.
Yeah, the Aranara is how they say it in Japanese, but like I don't know what the English dub calls how they pronounce it.
Yeah, the Aranara, and instead it's just Kole writing little notes to herself. unbelievably funny. Yeah, no, she's great.
Yeah.
I love her. I mean, all the characters who are involved in sort of the main quest. Like, Dunya Zato is not going to be a playable character, but she's great. And you have Desha on the side, who is a very fun character, I think, and will be cool to see how they implement her. Nilo, we don't have a ton with yet, but I had a similar experience, Sean, where when you said the Squid Girl thing, it made sense to me, because she has a big scene at the end of the Archon quest where I'm like, I know this voice from somewhere, but I couldn't place it. She's great. Yeah, overall, the cast, it's a lot of... I like that they've previewed a big chunk of the cast already, because it's a bunch that I'm looking forward to playing as at some point.
Yeah, and then there's like a whole chunk of characters we haven't met yet that are obviously like in 3.1 they're going to open up the desert section, and there's a character Sinnoh who has been teased since like a trailer before the launch of the game as like the Sumeru character, and he's from the desert region. So there's like a whole side of like the whole world of Sumeru, like in the culture and all that shit that you only kind of get a glimpse at, and that's another thing that's very exciting. But yeah, it's just a great sort of tour of all these like wacky and like memorable characters. Yeah, Dishi is the one that particularly stood out to me, because I really like her stuff where I think she's aware that everyone looks at her and sees this like big bad scary mercenary lady, but she's actually like very polite and nice and kind.
Yes.
And there's something very funny, like one of the early reactions you get with her is Dunya Zato like says, hey, if I pay you this money, will you look the other way or whatever? And she's like, what? No, like I'm working a job. Like that's like wrong. Like, no, I mean, I'm here. I want to help you, but I'm not just gonna like take your money and let this thing happen. It's just like, and she says it in like Keigo in Japanese. So it's like, I don't know how that scene plays out in English. And I think sometimes the English subtitles look like she's maybe like speaks with an accent or something, which to me is like, no, the whole point of the character is that like, she's very proper and she's very nice, and it's only a couple of times where she kind of lets her hair down a bit when she's just one-on-one with the Traveler, and she lets a little bit more of a kind of gruff, more expected kind of mercenary manner of speech come out. But most of the time she's like so proper, it's like she could be having a conversation with fucking Ayaka in Inazuma. She's like very like straight with how she deals with stuff, and I think that's a very fun character dynamic with that character.
It absolutely is. Speaking of the English subtitles, so, I mean, you and I think, both play the same game in the same way, with Japanese voices, but with the English text.
Yes.
And so we do see all the English writing through that. I do have to say, this update has hammered home for me. The English writing bothers me sometimes. I think it's a little... I think it has a similar problem to some of, like, the Dragon Quest localizations, where I think it is too cute by half. Yes. Where I've really noticed it in this one is with the Ononara quest line, where I think that's what it is, right? Where you're going out with all the creatures in the woods. Mm-hmm. Okay. That is so overwritten. It is, because like, I feel like every sentence is like 8 made up proper nouns and 2 verbs, and it breaks my brain to read. And sometimes I think that's the case in some other scenes, but it's voiced, and I can kind of like latch on in Japanese to the nouns I actually have to know because they say it. And then, like, the sentence makes more sense to me. But it's just, I don't know, there's something about it, like, because the Ononara stuff doesn't have voices attached to it, and I'm only relying on the English, I found myself skipping kind of through a lot of dialogue because I find it kind of gibberishy. And then when you go back to the story stuff with the voiced content, I'm listening to it in Japanese and I'm reading it in English, and I do need the English to kind of help me understand, but then I can break down the Japanese sentence structure for you, and I can tell you, oh, that's just better written in Japanese. Like, that's a better phrased version of that sentence, like, in Japanese, and often it kind of helps me understand that. I sometimes think, I also just like that, I think they spell things in just confusing ways in English to kind of make it seem fantastical. Yes. And I kind of like in Japanese, I can just hear them say a word normally, and they haven't like overthought it hugely. There's just stuff like that where that's part of the benefit for me of playing in Japanese. And I don't know if you would have that benefit if you don't speak any Japanese, but it's definitely something that I've realized more and more in this update.
Yeah, and it's definitely something where it's like, obviously the original game script is in Chinese, but I know because I've like looked up some stuff because I was just curious that, what they're generally doing with the Japanese stuff with like the proper nouns at the very least is they're just taking whatever the Chinese characters that are being used and translating it into the equivalent Japanese kanji. So like the kami no me, like kami, majin being like the term for like a god that's not one of the 7. Like those are all just the Japanese pronunciations of the equivalent words used in Chinese because there's that linguistic similarity. Whereas in English, they make up all these weird terms. And I think with the Rannara stuff, like one of the things that's happening there is I think it is both meant to be Like, they are weird. And I think when you get deeper into the quest, you will kind of get used to how they talk and the weird way they talk, because they're meant to be kind of almost incomprehensible early on, because they don't usually talk to humans. They have their whole like weird culture and history, but I think it is exacerbated by the kind of clumsy and overdone way that the English translation is done. Because I've watched a little bit of that quest line in Japanese with a streamer I watch sometimes that streams Genshin Impact stuff, and they're a Japanese streamer. And so I've seen some of that written in Japanese, and it is a little bit more straightforward, but it is still like, they're talking in weird terms, and you're like, what the fuck is this person saying? Because all they're like, their own exotic terms for like common day things. But yeah, I think it has long been the case that the overdone translations of terms like, it's not wind, it's a Nemo. It's not right. God, it's Archon. And that's the one that bothers me the most, is the use of the term Archon. And I think you see it a lot here, is that Kusanali, or Kuraksanali Devi, if you're using like the full, they call her Lesser Lord Kusanali, and Kuraksanali Devi, that they call her in Japanese is like that Kura, and that Devi at the end is what they're translating as Lesser Lord. But those are like Sanskrit terms, not Japanese terms. So I don't, it's kind of inconsistent in that approach in terms of like how the different languages translate, or what they do and do not translate, or leave in the original language that they're using. But Kusanali, or Nahida, she is acting like much more like a god in like an understandable way than I feel like most of the gods in Genshin typically have been, right? So like Barbados / Venti has like fucks off. He's the god of freedom. He doesn't care. He doesn't do anything godlike almost at all, because that's just like not his thing. Zhongli / Morax, he has like said, hey, that we needed, like, Liyue has transcended its need of me, I'm stepping away. So he's like intentionally stepped away from his position as a god. Raiden Shogun is one part god, but is more like emperor, right? And just like rules that nation like a political figure. Whereas Kusanali is unseen, and she is like not observed and not cared about, but she goes and she helps people and visits them in their dreams and supports them as like, a bird on the wind. Like, that's her whole thing. And you get that with Dunyazado and then Nilo and that whole side of the story of the sort of like the kind of underclass living in Sumeru City in the academia, who care about like culture and art and religion and spirituality, and don't care as much about the Enlightenment kind of, pursuit of knowledge and reason and all of that above all else. And this like mirrors, some like Persian stuff. It mirrors some like, Western Europe history, I think is the kind of influences some of the story that they're telling here. But a point of that is the kind of spiritual and religious nature that this group of people like Dunyazado has with Kusanali as a god. And so using the word god or kami in Japanese is much more meaningful to the text than using this weird term taken from like pseudo-Latin archon, which means nothing. And I have no association with that term. It's the same thing as like, the Dragon Quest thing, where in Dragon Quest 11, in Japanese, the main character is called the Yusha, which just means hero. And in the English dub, they called him the Luminary, which means nothing. It's like, I know what it means because I can break down the Latin terms, but it doesn't mean anything in like my heart. It doesn't hit anything in like my gut, in the way that the word hero means something instinctively in a gut way, and the way the word God means something in a gut way. That Archon is a thing I only understand the meaning of in an intellectual sense.
And this is a problem that goes back to just the entire history of anime and video games translated into English, is there has always, always, always been some weird knee-jerk fear to ever translating the Japanese word God or other words for God into the English equivalents. And, if it's something like Dragon Ball, it makes sense, because I think if you had the characters running around saying, I'm going to go visit God today, in English, that would sound weird, and so I understand why they call him Kami. Dragon Ball Z Abridged makes funny jokes out of this, right? Where Goku's like, talking to God, and that's funny. But then there's a lot of other works where it is absolutely problematic, and I think this is one of them, where the word is God, just call them a god, it's fine. We are all mature enough to know you don't fucking mean, like, the Christian God and this is blasphemy. Like, just shut up. Gods can mean a lot of different things. Part of the fun of Genshin is that as you tour the regions, you see gods that like like Venti is much more like a Greek god, you know? He fucks around and drinks wine. And then this is much more like a, you know, a Hindu or Muslim or Judeo-Christian god in Kusanali, who like lives with you and is a spiritual force, you know? And I love that side of it. And yeah, the word Archon means absolutely fuck all. And then also then there's also other problems, like if you call this Archon and you call this Vision, you've just obscured the link between them, which is that it's God and it's God's eye. That is important, and I think that will be important in that, hey, what's the difference between the main character in the game and all the other characters? Oh, they don't have a God's eye, but they can use the powers? That might become something at some point, anyway. Or the fact that the word Genshin does not appear in the English version of Genshin Impact because they changed that too. Anyway, it's frustrating.
Yeah, it's a frustrating thing that has been like that for the English dub forever. But yeah, like and luckily, like if you just play with the Japanese voices, you get around most of that if you have a basic understanding of the Japanese stuff. Or obviously, also if you're playing in Chinese, it's the same way. I cannot speak to the Korean dub. I do not know how that works. It is probably closer. It would be my guess because again, there's more linguistic heritage there that is shared than certainly in English, where there's like effectively none.
And this is just also in line with, there's so many English dubs like this. They're very much, I think, taking their cues from Dragon Quest is the main one. And, you know, there's some charms to that. But, yeah. Anyway, this is kind of off topic, but it's something that came up for me playing this one.
Yes. But I'm really looking forward to, in a couple of months, playing Archon of War Ragnarok. Because that would be a great name for that franchise, would have been Archon of War. Why did they call it God of War? Nobody knows what that means. I think that illustrates
you also couldn't
point.
use Ragnarok, Sean, so it would be like Archon of War, Big Blood Fest.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But anyways, I think so. We're like kind of touching on some of this main story stuff. And I think the thing with Sumeru is, like, I'll say straight up, I think this is, if you're saying like the main Archon chapters, this is the best main Archon chapters in the game, particularly chapter 2, which is like the big, like sort of marquee one. And you know, I think I'd have to think longer about, is it straight up like the best major piece of story content, like if you put it next to like Raiden Shogun chapter 2 or like Zhongli's story chapters or like the Hu Tao one, like I would have to equivocate on that a little bit more. But if you're going by like
Ayaka's story,
if you're going by like the main chapters that push the main story forward, I think this is like the best they've done. It is so incredible, and a lot of it comes from how thorough I think they have thought about the world and this nation, and how like in the thematic links of everything in Sumeru, which extends far outside just the main story. It touches everything. But I think I knew I was going to be hooked on this story when one of the first things you learn when you come into Sumeru is that researcher lady who like gets high in a cave and almost starves to death or whatever they have to go save, which is great. You know, there's a lot of people doing shrooms in Sumeru because there's shrooms all over the place. But she tells you that in Sumeru, when people grow up, they stop dreaming, and that is a point of pride, because it is in the academia. It is, you know, dreams are things seen as like childish, foolish things, and when you grow up, you lose the ability to dream, and that means you're an adult and like you're a reasoning person. And like as soon as you learn that piece of information, I was like, that is such a like good concept for a fictional nation. This idea that, again, it hits on all these like ideas of like the Enlightenment and the Renaissance and kind of pushes them on their head. And if you're thinking in like a Western literary context, it's very much using the same themes of the Romantic period of like the 18th and 19th centuries of like when the Enlightenment ideas or like the Age of Reason idea goes too far and you start rejecting sentimentality too much and you start rejecting like dreams and intuition and spirituality and art and culture, those things, and you start sacrificing that for this pursuit of like some kind of cold hard reason, that you start losing so much of what it is to be human, what it is to like live in the world. And so this contrast they build up immediately of the forest is the world of nature. It is the world of dreams. You have the Arannara, who are these like spirits and fairies that live in the forest that also live in the world of dreams and understand that like for them dreams and reality are two sides of the same coin and all this kind of stuff that you learn when you're in their side, their neck of the woods, literally. But then the academia is trying to suppress all that and ignore it. And to the point where you ultimately learn, this will be spoilers for the story stuff, that they are mining people's dreams for knowledge and insight and wisdom. And it's like which clearly means that they understand that the world of dreams and the world of the imagination is where wisdom ultimately comes from, but they, on the public end, reject it because they're afraid of it and they want to control it. And so they're eating people's dreams, especially like effectively, in order to try to, create their ultimate academy. And that is such a like powerful notion for a story that I think hits on so many interesting themes that every element of Sumeru, whether you're doing the side quests, whether you're doing just exploring around the world, or you're playing the main narrative content, like this dichotomy between dreams and reason and the forest and the city, like runs through every single facet of it. And it's so interesting to me.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. The dream detail was definitely the one where I perked up too at like the world building of it all that's such a juicy detail to kind of drop on you. But I'm definitely, I've been thinking about this a lot in terms of comparison to the Inazuma story, which I also loved. The Inazuma 2.0 and 2.1 story was great. But that one was sort of structured like a big Japanese action movie, like a samurai movie, with the traveler as your sort of Ronin who comes in and like comes into the town and is your Zatoichi figure or something, exactly. Right? And I think that worked very well. And that was a very kind of like, high octane story where you're moving very fast and you're meeting a lot of things. And like, I just remember like 2.0 has the 2 chapters where just a lot of big things go down. You get whacked by the Raiden Shogun. You go out and meet the other soldiers and there's a big battle scene. And then it kind of ends on a big cliffhanger. And then in part 2, you sort of resolve the story, but it's very, very, high, fast paced. And then Sumeru feels like it's almost intentionally going in the exact opposite direction because you come and Sumeru is very settled as a nation. There's no big conflicts going on. You're not walking into the middle of things. When you meet Kolei and Tinari, they're happy to see you and to have you and to introduce you to things. And it's just sort of very chill getting to know this world and its peculiarities. And you start to realize there are just things that are off about it. And it's all these little pieces that are teeing up then at Chapter 2, which is certainly the most conceptual story they've done in Genshin Impact, because it becomes sort of a Groundhog Day loop that is even more complex than your typical Groundhog Day loop thing, and becomes this very personal story about Don Yarzado, who's a character that will not be one of the most major non-playable characters I think they've done in a story like this. And sort of, about sort of literally about her dreams of this festival for this god. But then there is this whole conspiracy at the center of it that you unravel that tells you a lot about Sumeru and does tee up a bunch of new stories that we'll get, I'm sure, in 3.1 and 3.2, because they're going to have 5 chapters overall in this Act 3, or 5 acts in Chapter 3. So that might extend all the way into like 3.2. But it doesn't feel like this one is setting up a cliffhanger the way the end of 2.0 did. It feels like you are told a complete story, and in that complete story, the seeds of all the future stories are planted, and it makes you want more, but I think in a very different way than Inazuma does. And to me, I think I found it ultimately even more satisfying, because it just feels like there's so much meat on the bones of this story, and then the way it is very conceptual and for this game, experimental in how it lays things out. Just makes it's such a page turner. That Chapter 2 I played basically in 2 sittings, like at night, went to sleep, woke up, finished it, because I was getting very tired and I wanted to not, fall asleep during the middle of it, but it was hard to like put it down because it is such a page turner of a story.
I mean, I'll say that like one of the reasons why we've pushed back Full Metal Alchemist Brotherhood Part 1 for Japanimation Station is 100% because last Sunday or whatever, I started playing Chapter 2 and I could not stop playing it. And so I didn't get to watch. I was planning on watching a lot of Full Metal Alchemist that day, and I did not watch like any of it. So, because I was just like, I couldn't put it down, because it's very, I mean, Genshin Impact has always had a very visual novel style to a lot of its storytelling. But like it kind of moves a little bit between, like, sometimes it's a little bit more kind of video game, like more conventional video gamey, which obviously is what Genshin Impact literally is. It's a third person action game. But oftentimes you get these like very visual novel style thing where there's a couple of little fights that you might do, but it's mostly you just walking around and talking to people. And I feel like Sumeru like really leveraged that a lot. And a big part of it is that with that Chapter 2, they're doing the Groundhog Day story. I mean, that is a classic visual, like Japanese sci-fi visual novel thing. There are a lot of big Japanese visual novels like Steins Gate and Higurashi no Naku Koroni. Like it's almost like a trope with stuff like 999 or Clannad, where it's like, oh, are these separate stories, or is it one big story in like a multiverse, or is it like a Groundhog's Day where people are repeating the same thing over and over? It's just like a big thing in a lot of Japanese media. And I think a clear thing is the people at Hoyoverse definitely played 13 Sentinels Aegis Rim. Like that is a clear influence because they basically borrow the adventure game mechanic of like the thought balloons that you're connecting the ideas together. It's obviously not as fully featured as it is in 13 Sentinels because it's just this one chapter as opposed to a whole game. But it is like 13 Sentinels Aegis Rim. I think it's looking at this sort of Groundhog Day time loop story and thinking about how can we kind of push one of these stories into slightly new territory, and make it a little like make it unexpected, and also give this kind of player agency at the core of it, at least in like a superficial way, if nothing else, in terms of like, you know, the traveler feels so active and trying to decipher what's going on. It's something they have continually been like good at. I think in some of the main story stuff, you saw it a lot in Nazuma, is finding ways to have the traveler be a real person at the center of the story, acting on the story and being a real agent. You know, to the point where I love, there's a whole section where the traveler has gone and done a thing that you, the player, are unaware of because you have lost the memory of it and you have to have that revealed to you later by that recording and all that. There's so many interesting ideas to how to do this kind of Groundhog's Day story in this Genshin Impact format. While also, I think, having like a fun twist on it, which is the dreamlike nature of it. That it's not just a Groundhog's Day, it is a Groundhog's Day in a dream. And it's like really zooming in on that idea. And nestling that inside this much bigger like concept or thematic like kind of tapestry of dreams and emotion and culture and artistic sensibility versus reason and logic and like bureaucracy and government and politics, which is what the Academy is. And so all those elements all kind of feeding into this really great fever dream version of Groundhog's Day thing. With all that on top of it being that they like clearly have like added a lot of tools to their in-game kind of cinematic like presentation stuff. Like there are a lot of
wanted to talk about this. Yes.
Yeah. There's like they do a lot of interesting camera angles. They clearly have like changed how they do like depth of field stuff, because there's a really gorgeous depth of field effect they can do that they do in a lot of shots now. That like depth of field has been in the game for a while, but they've like, I feel like they've upgraded it or something because it looks so clean and good. And like
the two big things they've added to like their arsenal in terms of just basic cinematic language is that you have a bunch of canted angles, Dutch angles, as they're sometimes called. And I was just clearly they liked that because they do it all over the place, as all the new Dutch angles. And then they do focus racking. They do like you'll focus rack from one character to another in the distance. I was like, they couldn't do that before. That's cool. And yeah, that kind of stuff was just like, as a film person, I was like, this is very advanced for this game, and I like it.
Yeah, and it's like, you know, it's not obviously, you know, it's not a fucking Naughty Dog game or like a Yakuza game or something. It is not to that level. But for Genshin Impact, which has been up to this point very much the characters stand in one place. They have their like dozen or so emoting animations that they play through as you do the lip sync software or whatever that like has their lip flaps move. The camera cuts, you know, Mass Effect style back and forth. Like, that's very much what it's been, which has been fine. You know, it's a free-to-play gacha game with all this, like, crazy content. Like, it is way more fully featured and robust in that cinematic presentation than any other game in its genre. But this definitely pushes it to the next level. And, like, you get some really interesting sequences, some beautiful shots. You know, like, Dunya Zado on that balcony with the sunset, talking about like when she reveals that she has this, you know, mortal sickness, the Elazar disease or whatever it's called. The Marinbyo in Japanese, the same thing that Kole has, but for Dunya Zado, it seems to have been less well managed because she's older. And, you know, she knows that she doesn't have a lot of time left. And that's like a really gorgeous sequence that is well shot. It's well considered. It uses the art beautifully. We'll talk about the music. Like, the music is amazing. And there are a lot of sequences like that. There are some cool montages that they do where characters fade in and out with like a static camera, and the characters load back in and they're doing something different to present the idea that this loop has been happening. There's just a whole cinematic sensibility to how they present that story that is one of the big things to me that pushes it to that next level. That it's not just, you know, it's not just the dialogue and the voice acting being really good, which it has always been for these major story beats. It is that the presentation which it is given to you is making more full advantage of what they can do, which is something that like a good visual novel also does. A good visual novel also finds out ways to use the music and use the art and the backgrounds and all that in inventive ways to give a more kinetic quality to the story than just reading the words on a page.
Yeah, I think that's so true. I think 13 Sentinels is a great comparison, not just because there's specific things it's sort of borrowing, but that general sensation of the twistiness and how sort of unsettled you are. And it's a page turner because you're trying to kind of piece together what's going on. And obviously there's lots of visual novels that do that, but 13 Sentinels does it particularly well. We talked about it, a year or two ago on the podcast. Great game if you haven't played it. Just came out on Switch. You should definitely play that game. But anyway... Yep. Yeah, no, it's amazing. And also like it's an emotional, heartfelt story with so many beautiful things going on around Dunyarzado, and it's like sad. And there is, I think, maybe Kogo Aoi's most adorable line readings is when Paimon has lost the Traveler for a day and she comes back and it's just and like crying about, I thought you were gone forever, but you're back. It's oh my god, I didn't know there was any more adorableness to wring out of Paimon at this point, but there is. Yeah, no,
Paimon, a lot of great Paimon stuff across the whole story. And then, of course, you've got Nahida, the, god of Dendro, or the Dendro Archon, or Kuraksanari Devi, if you want to go by her official title, who is played by Tamara Yukari in Japanese, who is also the voice of Chi-Chi. So this is the first time they have gone and used an existing voice actor. Of course, like Chi-Chi doesn't really have a lot of main story stuff. So I think that's probably one of the reasons why they decided to go with her. And she does a great job. And I like Kusanali. She feels appropriately, like all the Archons feel very different, and she feels very different. And I get the sense that there's a lot about that character we do not know yet, and her relationship with her predecessor, whose name I will never be able to remember because it's very confusing, and the way it's written in English and the way it's pronounced in Japanese are two different. I will never be able to put it together. But that idea that there was this other god that died during the Cataclysm, somewhat similar to Raiden Shogun's sister, but left behind some new elfin entity. I like. It seems to me that she's meant to be the same species as Clay because she has the same pointy kind of elf ears. But this idea that the nation has this sort of infant god and sets her up as a bit of a figurehead, but it mostly like uses the memory of her predecessor as this propagandistic figure so that the Academy can be the thing that sort of actually is the de facto ruling force of the nation. And Kusanali is in her tower and sends out like these little birds and visits people in their dreams and stuff like that to help them as this kind of removed, more like sort of traditional godlike entity. That is whose presence is felt much more than it's seen by her believers. And the fact that she has people who are believers in her, which is like, we've seen a church in Mondstadt, but we don't get the sense of like religion being a factor in those other natures in the way that this is like a religious experience that for the people who believe in Kusanali. And that dynamic is really cool, and I think adds so much richness to what they're doing with Sumeru, because again, the spiritual religion element being tied to dreams in the forest as the contrast for the Academy, like really just makes all the motifs come together really beautifully. Particularly when you have that god character being an entity who is there that you're like working with.
Yes, absolutely. Love it. I love the structure of it in that chapter 3, Act 1, is all about you, the Traveler and Paimon, going around trying to find Kusanali and coming up short. They never get anywhere near her.
They're like trying to find her. They ask everybody, and everyone's like, "Oh yeah, I don't know." It's like it seems like nobody ever even thought about it. Like nobody had the idea that's like, "Oh yeah, I guess the god is like she is like a entity. I guess you would technically be able to visit her, but yeah, I don't know. I guess." You have to ask somewhere else. I've never really thought about it. It was just like a weird reaction. It's very different than, there's not a person in the other three nations who, if you went up and said like, hey, how do you meet Barbados? How do you meet Morax? How do you meet like Raiden Shogun? They would all have an answer. They'd say Barbados, fuck if I know. Like that dude's just fucked off. He's gone. Morax would be either you have to wait a year or now, he's dead. You can't. And then Raiden Shogun is like, well, you can go to the palace, but they're probably not going to you see her. Whereas these people are like, I never thought, well, that's weird. Anyways, I'm going to go about my day. And that was like, I think a really fun mystery for that first part of the story is like, why do people have this like weird reaction to their own god?
And so it becomes a little bit of a surprise when she shows up. Not the actual moment when she says she's a god, because they even make a joke about it that like, well, yeah, we knew you were the god as soon as we met you, because we've been waiting for you. But when she finally shows up in the sort of, it's right after you start to realize that you're in some sort of weird loop, and then you meet her. And I just think that's a very satisfying way to do it. It's like once you've put that on the back burner for a minute, because now the Traveler and Paimon are thinking about something else, that's when she comes in. It's just a very good storytelling structure.
Yeah, and that you don't actually ever even see the first moment that the Traveler and Paimon met her, because that happened in a loop that you didn't actually experience. So by the time you meet her, she has already met you multiple times, which is a good, again, way to kind of like disorient the player.
Yes.
Think about
I'm
the Groundhog Day.
To when she is a... Oh, sorry. I was just going to say, I'm looking forward to when she is a player, because then we will be able to make an all-god team with 4 of them. I don't think it'll be that good a team, because it'll have Geo and Anemo. It will have Electro and Dendro, probably, but we'll see. Yeah,
Raiden Shogun and Nahida will do a lot of work in that team. Then Venti and Zhongli will be in the background being like, well, we'll keep you, we'll keep your health up. And it's like,
yes.
I'll do a little bit of swirling, I'll put that shield up, but you guys do all the damage. But yeah, I was going to say that, like, think of the Groundhog Day. I think my favorite little touch with that was the, like, Ferris Knight guy and you picking the boxes, and, like, the couple of times you do the loop, and, like, the fact that they tell you what the right box is, and then you can pick the right box, which is number 4, on the second go, and then eventually, like, you go through the loop a couple times, and then it's, like, the only option is number 4. That's, like, a really good classic visual novel type thing, It just feels like they really knew the kind of, like, material that had explored this type of story that they were being inspired by, and like really understood how that works and how you can get some of those kind of juicy, fun video gamey moments from it like that.
Yeah, or that you have all the times in the day, because the first loop is reality.
Yes.
And then after that it's dreams, because you have the real Dunyarzado there, and you have like her getting attacked, and you have Daisha coming in, and you have the thing. I love the thing about this is one of my favorite details they do. She's not used to her new sword, because she sold it to help start the festival, because she wanted to make Dunyarzado happy, but she gets injured because she's not used to the sword, but then eventually she doesn't get hurt at all, because even though she doesn't remember it, she's used the sword so many times in this time loop. That's awesome. That's a great little use of the time loop thing.
Yeah, and every time you talk to Dishia, like, you're like, it's just like, you get to this point where you have had to try to convince her so many times that you just, like, say the thing, like, offhand about, like, oh yeah, no, that's not your sword. And she's like, what the fuck? Like, how the hell do you know that? Where, like, the first time, it's this long conversation about it. You're like, yeah, no, I know, the sword thing, the money, whatever. You just kind of move on. Like, I love these kind of Groundhog Day time loop stories, and all of those kind of fun moments you get to have of, the characters getting to see the character react in different ways to the same scenario over and over again because of something different the main character has done is always fun.
Yeah, it's fantastic. I think it probably is the best Archon Quest stuff in the game. But more than that, like, more than better, worse, whatever, it's so different. It's so completely, like, I think you said this at the beginning, it would have been reasonable to expect, like, Inazuma was so good and so triumphant that if they made 3.0 kind of modeled off 2.0, you would understand it, and they went as far in the other direction as possible. This is a very, very different version of that, and so I'm just not drawing really any comparisons at all in my head. It's like, I love this and I love this too in a different way because it's different.
Yeah, it feels like they're pulling such different thematic ideas and motifs and sort of genre inspirations for the story they're telling that, yes, it is not, it doesn't sort of like, it never feels like you're repeating an idea, certainly, but it also means that, yeah, you're not sitting there thinking about, oh, Inazuma did this better, or this did this better than Inazuma or Liyue or Mondstadt. It's like, no, all these stories have been so different and pursuing their own goals in perspective of this, like, much very, very big tapestry of a story that Genshin Impact is telling about, like, history and all this stuff, that this is a different phase or different version of it, and it's very fun to be in this place, right? We've been in the Inazuma place for like a year, thinking about like eternity and culture and like the fractious nature of culture with these like different people coming together from these different island nations, and trying to make this sort of one nation, and how do you keep it stable, all that kind of stuff that were some of the themes of Inazuma. And now we're in this very different place in Sumeru, and like you said earlier, the conversation, it is very exciting to think of like the year of this we're going to have, of like what is going to be the enconomia of Sumeru, you know, where like 8 or 9 months later we'll get something that like totally changes how you understand what the desert area is or stuff like that. The way that like added so much depth to the Watatsumi Island area of the Inazuma region.
Or like eventually we'll have a character story for Nahid or Kusanali, and that's going to be awesome, I assume, you know, because the one for Raiden Shogun was just, or she had two. Yeah, they were so good.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a lot of good stuff to come. Low key, though, maybe the best thing about this whole update is the music. As the music is always the best thing about Genshin Impact, because it might be the best video game music ever. Certainly the most video game music ever. And somehow they've just upped their game again, because now they're able to use stuff like the sitar, and it sounds sweet as shit. And I love it.
So fucking good. Like, it's too early to play the, like, which does this have, like, the best regional soundtrack, because there's a whole half of this fucking nation we haven't met before. Or we have not met yet to see, like, 3.1 is going to have a lot of new music in it also. And the soundtrack for Sumeru has not released yet. But, like, it is definitely, like, in contention for me already with, like, my favorite music in the game. Some of those tracks and the motifs are so good. There was a moment last night where I was finishing up the Aranana quest, which has, like, a very big, crazy finale. Again, that quest line is huge. And it has a really satisfying conclusion, and one of the main, like, a nighttime version of one of the main motifs started playing, and I don't know if it was like that cutscene is designed, or like the in-game, like, dialogue sequence is designed to have this music play, or if it was just because that's the region of the world and that's the time of day that I would happen to enter that point of the story. But, like, one of the, like, this quiet version of one of the main themes played, and it hit me so hard, because you're talking with this, like, fairy about, like, dreams and the world and, like, trees and, like, that the forest, or the jungle never forgets, and all this stuff, and that dreams are never forgotten, all the, like, these, like, ideas that you have been exploring throughout that storyline. And the music comes in, and, like, I almost started tearing up. There wasn't anything super emotional actually happening in the story, because the emotional stuff had finished. There was just, like, the weight of the ideas of the story coinciding with, like, that music that I think Yuping Chen and the Hoyo Mix team have always been so good at tying the music thematically into the history of the world, of that area of the world that they're exploring. The Liyue music, the Mondstadt music, the Inazuma music all feel so different, both because it's drawing direct inspiration from Japan or China or, sort of like Germanic cultures, the regions that those areas are from, but also because I think there's a thought about, well, because it's not just China. Liyue is not just China. Liyue is its own nation inspired by China. And so a lot of the Liyue themes, I think, do such a good job at capturing the sort of, like, majestic history of that nation that has this huge storied history, but then the sort of, like, kind of almost quirky mercantile nature of what it is today. And the Liyue music blends all that stuff together. And I think there's something similar about the sort of mystery of the forest that you get in Sumeru, combined with, all these people trying to make their way in this sort of, like, oppressive sort of academic nation or bureaucratic nation of academia, and the blend of those ideas together in the ancient stuff mixed with this more modern stuff. And I think you pointed out this track on Twitter. It is easily one of, if not the best track in Sumeru, is the tavern music, which captures all of that. It, like, captures all of that in this, like, simple fucking tavern song that plays in the restaurants in Sumeru City, that especially when it moves into the saxophone piece in the second half, where a saxophone starts taking over the main melody. And it's like the blend of the modern and the sort of, like, culturally specific instrumentation and all that together. It feels like you feel the history of this world and its culture through that music so profoundly, while also the music just being so aesthetically pleasing on top of all of the more kind of high-minded stuff that I think it accomplishes for the game.
Absolutely. Couldn't have said it better myself. And I wanted to talk about this theme in the tavern because that is my favorite piece of music in Genshin Impact, bar none. I adore it. I've already had to go find different people who've pulled it out on YouTube and made a 30-minute mix of it. And I'm like, I'll absolutely listen to that for 30 minutes because it is just that good. That when the sax comes in, it is the smoothest goddamn sax I have ever heard. It sounds so good. It's such an interesting piece because it's kind of jazzy, but it also has these sort of, exactly what you're talking about, of the influences of the region itself, but it isn't quite that. It's so good. And as you say, it tells you about the world. It creates an atmosphere. There's just something about everywhere you are in Sumeru, the music tells so much of the story to me. And of course, Genshin has always been good at that, but I think they just keep getting better. Clearly the music budget for this game is off the fucking charts because I think the recording and the mix of the music is even better than it's been before, and it's always been good. But there's something about like the degree of instrument separation where you can just hear all the different instruments that sound so good. And if you haven't heard it, by the way, they did, as part of promotion for 3.0, a live symphony of some of the Sumeru music. It's a 10-minute performance. It's on the Genshin Impact YouTube page. It was done with the London Symphony Orchestra, and it is just the best 10 minutes of music you'll hear all day. It's incredible. It's a great performance. You see all these accomplished players playing the different instruments that are unique to Sumeru, and it's the places in the real world that it's taking influence from. It's an amazing set of music, and by God, that soundtrack cannot come soon enough.
Yeah, I mean, it's crazy to think like how much music they have done for Genshin Impact, and that like this feels so fresh, right? It's like one of the great things about like the nature of them being able to pull fresh musical influence from different real world cultures is that it injects a whole new kind of DNA into the Genshin Impact kind of musical palette, which the Genshin Impact musical palette on its own is already pretty eccentric. Like it spans both like crazy symphonic stuff, like very simple restrained piano melodies that's just a single piano, and then you get like crazy metal shit in some of the big boss fights. I mean, there's like trap music that fucking plays in some of Raiden Shogun's themes. Like it goes all over the place and pulls all kinds of influences well outside just like the regionally specific ones. But then you have that kind of cultural music on top of that that's specific to the regions, mixes in with the eccentric taste that Genshin already has, and it just makes like what I feel like we don't even have anywhere near close to what will be the full body of music, and it's already the best video game soundtrack to me. Like it's just like it's almost unfair to other video games. Like other video games can't even compete. It's like another video game gets to have like 12 fucking separate soundtracks, all recorded by various world like premier orchestras. Live performances. Like it's just so extreme. And what they're able to extravagant what they're able to do for the soundtrack of this game. On top of it's just the musical compositions themselves being so interesting and diverse and complex in very rich ways. And this just adds so much more on top of it. It's crazy.
Do you want to guess how many soundtrack albums have been released commercially so far for Genshin Impact? I have the number in front of me.
I mean, it's got to be about a dozen, maybe. Somewhere around
16.
There. 16.
It's 16.
Damn.
So we have the original Wind and the Star Traveler, which was like the little sampler soundtrack, 28 minutes. You have City of Winds and Idols, which is all of... I'm going to read all these because the titles are great.
Yes.
That's Mondstadt. You have Jade Moon Upon a Sea of Clouds, which is Liyue. You have the Stellar Moments, which is the character songs. You have Vortex of Legends, which is the Dragonspine area. You have Shimmering Voyage, and we've since had Shimmering Voyage 2, which is the year memorial soundtrack. You have a separate version of City of Winds and Idols that was released for CD. I don't know if we should count that one, but that was a special release. You have Realm of Tranquil Eternity, which was Inazuma. You then have the special featured Dolby Atmos soundtrack that they did at the end of last year, which was for spatial audio, which actually is one of the best spatial audio mixes I've heard. If you have the capability to do that, that's an amazing little soundtrack. They took pieces from all over the game and redid it in Atmos. You have the EP Fleeting Colors in Flight, which was for the Chinese opera thing.
Yes.
You have the Melodies of an Endless Journey, which is the 2021 symphony. That's the full 2-hour symphony they did. You have Stellar Moments Volume 2, which is more character songs. You have Islands of the Lost and Forgotten, which is all the island stuff.
Yeah, that's Watatsumi and Enkanomiya.
Yeah. Yep. You have Millilith's Watch, which is for the Chasm.
Yeah.
You have Shimmering Voyage Volume 2. And okay, technically this one isn't out yet, but was announced at that symphony thing. Footprints of the Traveler, which is going to be all the other trailer musics. That is coming soon as well. So that is 16 that are out on the market or coming, and then, of course, many more to come. That's 2 years, 16 soundtracks.
Yeah, because it is like it's about every 3 months or so they release a new soundtrack. Like it's pretty fucking crazy. It's so much,
and they're all good. They're all great. It's unbelievable. Yeah,
because it's always very exciting when you get one of those soundtrack drops, especially for the ones like the Shimmering Voyage, where you're like, okay, yes, because it's like those are like these. They have like the summer event music, and then it's like this grab bag of, yes, this one boss music hadn't been in, or like this music from this cutscene in Leeway. It's like fun to go through those and try to identify, okay, where is this like these random smatterings of new music that they occasionally do in updates that don't really have a home in any other soundtrack release. It's like that's a problem that no other video game has, that they do so much new music that they don't know where to fucking put them on the soundtrack releases. Because most other gacha games, like, will get, like Fate Grand Order or Dragon Ball Legends. I've fucking played, games like the Love Live rhythm game as a gacha game. That like is a music-based game that doesn't get as much new music as this. It's crazy. And for all of it to be so good, my like Genshin Impact playlist is so long at this point. That is just like I have a playlist called Genshin Impact Chill Music that is all the like very kind of like mellow music that I will sometimes play in my class also. There's like, I can't wait for the Sumeru one to come out because there's a lot of good chill music in that too. That is good, just like put it on the background, and then every once in a while a single tear drops down your cheek because the theme reminds you of what happened to A or whatever. It's like it's just some of my favorite music from the past 2 years, regardless of its source. It is just this is just so much more good music on top of all that.
This is painting a very vivid picture for me, Sean. I'm imagining you in your classroom. You've given all the students like quiet reading time. You're playing some songs from Sumeru. One student puts down their copy of the Odyssey, looks up at you and sees a tear running down your cheek and says, "Mr. Chapman, are you okay?" And you stare off into the distance and go, "Dunyarzado." Yeah.
I look out the window, because I do have a classroom that has windows now, which is very nice. I look out the window and just say, "Never forget your dreams, kid. Never forget your dreams."
All right. This is great. I'm loving it. I'm as excited for the 3.0 soundtrack as I am for 3.1 whenever that comes.
Yep.
Whenever we know when it's coming, 6 weeks. But yeah, it's great. Genshin Impact, it's always great, but it continues to find new ways of being great, and I think Sumeru has the most new ways that they've ever introduced. And I'm just, this is the thing I keep coming back to, Sean, is I'm just so excited for the next year of playing this game, because the foundation is more exciting than it's ever been.
Yeah, I'm excited for the next year, and then I'm excited for like the next couple of hours when I get to go back to play, because like there's so much of it that there's so much I still have not done, and I put a lot of time into this thing. Genshin Impact. It is crazy to me that we, how much podcast time we have talked about with Genshin Impact over the past 2 years, and that like they're still so like they make it worthwhile to come back and do Genshin Impact podcasts every few months or so, because
they do.
There's so much to fucking say.
And I'll just tell you guys right now, in the past, for my top 10 list, have not followed sort of Sean's rules of doing like year 2 of a video game or something. Not because I don't respect those, it's just I haven't done it. So like I didn't consider Genshin 2.0 for my list last year. I'm 100% Genshin Impact year 3 is going to be a contender. It will be high up. It probably won't beat Elden Ring, but that's because that's Elden Ring. Other than that, maybe beats everything else. It's phenomenal.
Yeah, it's so good. It blew my expectations out of the water. And that's, I think, like saying something, because it has been a long time since a day passed that I did not play Genshin Impact in that day. And this still has like really pushed my expectations up.
You love Genshin Impact more than most people love their children. It's
exactly.
Amazing. So there you go. Well, that is it for this stretch of the podcast. Sean, do you want to transition over to talking some Mobile Suit Gundam?
Yes, we've talked about one G thing with Genshin Impact. Let's talk about a different G thing with Gundam. Hello and welcome to Weekly Suit Gundam, a special bonus podcast brought to you by the folks at Japanimation Station. I'm Sean Chapman.
And I'm Jonathan Lack.
And we are here to open a brand new era of the podcast. We have been acquired by the fine folks at Japanimation Station. And it's a new era of Gundam under a new host, but it's still Weekly Suit Gundam. It's still Sean and Jonathan here at the wheel to talk about the newest Gundam sensation, the prologue for Witch from Mercury.
Indeed. We obviously have been very excited for the new Gundam show, the first proper new AU Gundam show since Iron-Blooded Orphans began in 2015, and The Witch from Mercury did have this prologue episode that premiered at a convention a couple months ago, but had not had a full official public release. It did release on the Gundam Info YouTube page officially all over the world, subtitles in every language, well, not every single language, but a lot of languages, most of the languages you probably need. And so now it is out for the public, and we thought it was time to come back with a short episode of Weekly Suit Gundam to reflect this actually normal length episode, but it is one episode prologue for Witch from Mercury, which we are both very excited for, and I'm even more excited because this is a good prologue.
Yeah, it is a fantastic prologue. So once again, if you're listening to this and you have not watched it yet, you can find the prologue for free on YouTube if you go to the Gundam Info YouTube channel, and the closed captions has all your subtitle options that you need there. And as I said, Jonathan, this has been available in sort of private form for a couple of months as it kind of went through this tour of virtual events in Japan over the summer. I did actually watch it. I watched a pirated version, but it was only in Japanese around that point because I was curious, and I saw that Japanese Twitter went fucking crazy because they loved it. And so, but this was the first time I got to watch it, one in really nice quality because the quality I found was kind of bad, and with subtitles, which actually helped. It was a little bit hard to watch without subtitles because there was lots of weird proper nouns that I was like, am I mishearing a Japanese word, or is this a weird proper noun that I don't know that they've made up? And there are a lot of proper nouns they made up, which makes it hard to understand if it's your second language. But this is my second time watching it, and it's fantastic. I am so excited for the show. I think this prologue can basically be watched as its own standalone Gundam short film. Even if they never made a TV show off of it, it would already be a great little piece of Gundam. But I think it sets up a very exciting TV show to follow on with the little girl who will grow up to be Soletta Mercury. Unfortunately, we now know that her name is not actually Mercury. That is a pseudonym, which I'm the only disappointment with this prologue is to learn that the main character's name is not actually Mercury. But she will go to an academy, and there will be all kinds of high school Gundam hijinks and probably awful shit that will happen and crazy nonsense in the actual TV show.
I think there's two big things that struck me about this prologue. One is just how substantial it is. Because I had not been following that closely, I was just waiting for the official release. I just didn't, because I'm so excited I didn't really want to think about it, right? So I had kind of been waiting until the official release. The official release came, and oh my god, it's just a full episode of anime. It's 24 minutes and 30 seconds. It is a full-fledged episode of anime. It does not have an intro theme song yet, but obviously that'll be coming soon enough. It basically feels like episode 1 of a TV show, or what it is, which is a prologue. We've had some prologue kinds of things before. Gundam Build Divers did have a prologue that was about half as long as this, and was really just a big battle showing the champion from that series, how they became the champion, basically. It's fairly insubstantial, and you don't have to watch it. This, though, feels like absolutely you should watch it before. We haven't seen Witch from Mercury, but I imagine this will feel fairly essential. And it's excellent. It is not just substantial in terms of length, it is substantial in terms of world building. I love how much of a flag they are planting. They are raising their flag, to use the Iron-Blooded Orphans term, of this is our vision of Gundam. We've created a world where we are reinterpreting, which every AU show does, and this is an AU show that feels like, oh, this is a very full-throated statement of a new idea for Gundam, in that this is using the idea of Gundam in terms of biological and medical devices that then become something for weapons, doing the kind of Evangelion thing of which Gundam has played with in various ways, including in Iron-Blooded Orphans, of the suit being tied to the pilot in some way that endangers their life. And then, of course, having this main drama with the family that ends in what immediately goes into the pantheon of Gundam deaths, Jesus Christ, and also our youngest child pilot ever.
Yes.
Yep. The only way they could do more than this is have a literal baby pilot a Gundam, and eventually we're going to have to get there in Tomino's next production, probably. But yes, Jesus.
Yeah, it definitely, the prologue is extremely impressive in how it both feels like it makes you feel very confident that Gundam is in good hands with Witch from Mercury, which, all the people working on Witch from Mercury are experienced. So the director is Hiroshi Kobayashi, who is the director who worked on a bunch of Studio Trigger stuff like Kisniver. and Dragon Pilot, Hisoka to Mikotan, I think is what the subtitle of that show is. I haven't watched Dragon Pilot. I did watch Kisniver and liked it. It's not like Studio Trigger's best thing, but it's a good show. And then the other big person here is the script writer, is Ichiro Kochi, who is best known as the creator of Code Geass. So he's both the creator of that series and then the main writer for it. Which is a big, dramatic. I haven't seen it, but I know it's like a big dramatic mecha thing set at a high school and all this kind of stuff, which seems to be similar to some of the stuff they're doing in Witch of Mercury. But neither of those people have worked on Gundam stuff outside of like a little bit like a storyboard here, like an animation job here, but nothing like high up. But this feels like, okay, they know what like the core of Gundam is. It feels properly Gundam while still being very identifiably its own thing. You get like elements of Iron-Blooded Orphans. There's like elements of Thunderbolt in there with some of the like kind of transhumanism stuff with people who have had limbs amputated and stuff and like prosthetics. I definitely get a little bit of like the politics of Double O feels like an influence here. And in some of the aesthetics of G-Reco. So I think you can see that they're picking and choosing some of like the big things that they want from previous Gundam series while mixing it together in something that's very uniquely their own, which is like the recipe for success, I think, for AU stuff. That you see that's what IBO did. That's what Double O Gundam did. Like they looked at, hey, here's like some interesting stuff from Gundam Wing. Here's some interesting stuff from the original series. Like let's put that in a blender with some of our own original ideas and make something original out of it. And this feels like it is following in that tradition very confidently.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And I should also say Hiroshi Kobayashi, who's the director of the series, did do the storyboards for this prologue. That was entirely him. I saw that when I was watching the credits, and I thought, oh, that's cool, just to have the director come in and storyboard this entire prologue, because it is a very well, directed and boarded piece of animation. But yeah, I agree with all of that. It feels like immediately like, okay, this is another full, proper AU Gundam show. We haven't had a new one of those in a while. And immediately, I think it's establishing its bona fides. And the kind of mix of influences you're talking about there, that sounds pretty good to me. Because I love that G-Reco art style. And I like those Double O politics. And all those other pieces that you were describing. This sounds very fun. Well, maybe not always fun, but interesting.
Yeah. Fun. It's compelling. That's the word we use for Gundam. Not always fun. Gundam Build Fighters is fun. G Gundam is fun. This is like tragically sad. But yeah, and we don't even get in this obviously like all the high school stuff that will be in the main show, which I'm very excited for. They did release. I don't know if you saw this, Jonathan, because it was just earlier today. They did release a second trailer. That's about a minute-long trailer where you get a little glimpse of some of the high school stuff, and you get to hear a little bit of the main theme song for the show, or the original opening theme, which will be a song by the band Yo Asabi, which is a great band that I really like a lot of their music. So there's a whole side of obviously the main show that we don't even get to see much in this prologue, but it sets the tone for this world so effectively, and I think I'm going to assume that probably you would be able to watch episode 1 of the show without having seen this prologue, presumably because they did design this as a prologue. But I imagine that like you're really going to want this to have that level of just sort of like automatic buy-in on Soletta, our main character, when we visit her, because it's like if you want to be on a character's side, like watching this and having her dad get murdered while he's singing Happy Birthday, that's a thing that's going to be like, yeah, I'm with you. I'm with you, Soletta. Like, let's go like to the school and kill all these fuckers is what I hope she does.
So yeah, Sean, absolutely agree with all of that. But let's see, where do you want to start with just breaking down this prologue? Do you want to just start by kind of talking about the world they've seemingly created here? We don't have all the details on it, but it's a very juicy preview of what's to come.
Yeah. I think like the main thing, and this is something you kind of got from some of the pre-release stuff that they released, is that it's very focused on these kind of like massive economic blocks, right? These like kind of conglomerations of different huge companies, and the main one being this sort of like mobile suit development committee or council that they call, that is, you see this sort of like shadowy board meeting or whatever happening, that ultimately decides to cancel the Gundam project that our main characters are working on. And then one of the guys in there is some ex-military dude who's voiced by the guy who plays Uchiha Madara in Naruto. There's my Naruto reference for the day. And he is also the Federation captain in Gundam Unicorn, so there's that connection as well. But he secretly orders this mission to just go and kill all these people as the kind of bid for power. And that immediately, I think, kind of sets up a big thing that for the show is that it is more about these kind of massive private enterprises in private companies and them ultimately seemingly having more real and actual authority than individual governments. And so it is about these economic blocks more than it is about like the Earth, Ameria or whatever. And that, I think they set that up really well, that it's about these private enterprises researching mobile suits and deciding that, well, we don't like this Gundam stuff because it's maybe like if it works out for them, it's going to like totally fuck up all their shit and all their mobile suits are going to look obsolete. And so they totally destroy this entire project and then ultimately kill all the people involved with it to sort of save economic face. That I think is like a really kind of potent starting point that sets you up with this vision of the world dominated by money more so than it is dominated by what we would otherwise think of as politics, which is more government related.
Starting to sound familiar, though, given
yes.
things happening in the real world. But no, absolutely. It's kind of like a more sort of gritty, grounded version of the entire thing with like the Trade Federation in Star Wars Episode 1, right?
Yes.
And I like that aspect. But the other thing one of the things I found most remarkable about this prologue episode is that I found myself very, and I think intentionally, uneasy with what was going on morally. Like, obviously, not right to just go slaughter a whole group of people for no reason, right? But it isn't technically for no reason. There's the kind of two things. There's the part they are not saying, which is that they're doing this to eliminate the competition because someone is creating better mobile suits. But he also has this entire big speech about how, war is terrible, but in war, the weapon has to be the thing that kills. The weapon should not kill the user. And there's this entire thing of, well, but these mobile suits are also bad for the people in them. And we do see that. That is not a lie that person is saying here just to save face. It's being used in kind of a propagandistic way, but there is a truth that this Gundam system, or the Gund system that they have in a lot of different ways. This is one of the best things about any AU show is how are they going to creatively use the word Gundam? And this show has come up with its answer. And it is this thing that came out of medical technology, as you say, it's kind of like Thunderbolt, but more advanced. And it is like, different medical technologies. Also dealing with the very real issue of the science that you can't actually just go live in 0G for like years at a time and have a normal human body, which is a piece of science that most science fiction understandably doesn't deal with, but this one seems like it is. And yet there is this problem of the pilots who are in these mobile suits are being hurt, and it does have a negative impact on them. And so I think there was an interesting tension there at the heart of this of like, oh, is the Gundam system ethical? Obviously, the ethical response is not to slaughter everyone working on it, but like, it brings up some interesting questions that I'm sure the TV series itself is going to be highly invested in. Obviously, the people on this base were there doing it consensually, and there's a possibility for a better future to come of it. But I think there's an interesting tension there at the heart of this.
Yeah, and a big part of that is also that we know that, like, the scientist woman who's sort of runs this base, she doesn't want to make the Gundam as a weapon, right? She wants it as this sort of almost like transhuman, like, this is the thing this is like our new body that we can live on in space, and like it will allow us to live out in space and kind of transform us and remove us from the limits of our like, pathetic fleshy meatbags that we are. But that the only way for them to get funding is for this like other company like came in and basically bought them. And this is the thing that, that very like opening bit, you get a bunch of this exposition kind of talking about this, that they were purchased by this other company that has turned that research into a thing that like there now is mobile suits and this weapons thing, and not just this is technology that we can use to survive out in space. And so there's, that sense of the research that they are doing almost certainly is like really valuable and important. But the only way for them to do this like important kind of humanitarian research in developing this technology for humanitarian ends is for a massive weapons conglomerate to purchase them and turn that into how do we use this also as a way we can like sell a defense weapon to nations and to other like security companies and stuff like that. And that there's that tension as well. How do you actually, this technology can save us or help us, but how do you actually, in the world, get the means to develop that technology without it falling into the wrong hands and being used for, greed and power and conquest.
Well, and like, it's not hard to imagine that as soon as this goes into the hands of a military, you would have iron-blooded orphan style situations going on.
Exactly.
Where young people are going to be plugged into it and used until they die, right? So it's obviously a compelling question. And that the what's the name of the main kind of villain in this episode?
Delling Rembrandt.
It's a phenomenal name. That's why I wanted to say it. Yeah, Delling Rembrandt, voiced by Naoya Uchida, as you said, our Naruto reference of the day. He reminds me very much of like one of the villains of Iron-Blooded Orphans, because he's not fully lying. Like, he's not getting up there and just saying falsehoods, and he is able to wrap it in a way that sounds politically palatable, in a way that I'm imagining that, obviously when we come back for the main series, episode 1, there's going to be quite a sizable time jump, because our main character is a teenager in the main show. And I can imagine that the world will have gone along with that logic, because it sounds very sound if you don't have this surrounding context for it. And so I think all of that is just, like I said, it's very compelling. We have stuff in this episode like her mom, the main character's mom, has a robot arm, and she takes the arm off and has to like redo the like batteries in it or whatever. That was a very striking moment, because like cyborg body parts have never been a thing in Gundam before. There are the prostheses in Thunderbolt, but they are very like low grade. They're kind of like real world prostheses in that they can kind of do just the basic, like they can grab stuff, but they're mostly just like metal hooks, This is much more advanced than that, and it is dealing with this sort of transhuman stuff, as you say, in a way that Gundam has never quite fully gone into. Because in Thunderbolt, I don't know if I would connect it like philosophically with transhumanism in the way I think this episode is kind of gesturing at.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it feels like it's like an extension of and further exploration of those ideas that like Thunderbolt vaguely suggests that, but it's more grounded in using that as like a symbol for the ways in which that character is kind of chewed up by the military machine for every single piece that he has, right? And this is more like diving into the real world research and ideas around like replacing parts of your body with mechanics or whatever in order to be able to survive or be stronger, be better, or whatever it is that you want out of it.
Aries' mom, when she has the cyborg arm, that's not viewed as any kind of disability, right?
Yes.
It's a slight inconvenience because she has to reconnect the wires. It's not a disability. In Thunderbolt, it's a disability. When he is out of the mobile suit, there's a lot of scenes of, like, the main character, Daryl Lawrence, like, out on the beach, not being able to feel the water on his toes. That is not the focus here. And I think that's very interesting.
Yeah, and it's that thing where like you don't. I think one of the things that makes it a very notable moment when the mom takes that arm off is that you don't even register that like she had a prosthetic limb until that scene happens, right? And so it's like realizing, okay, right, this is like this integrated part of at least this side of the world. I think it's not yet clear whether or not that is like common, or if it's more that like this is a part of what these people are doing and their research and what they care about, and it has been turned into this weapons research.
Yes. But then, of course, we get a full massacre. In Grand Gundam fashion, things go very badly. A lot of blood floating in space. It's a very brutal sequence that ends this. That is like the centerpiece of this prologue. No big mobile suit. Well, there's a little bit of mobile suit action. I wouldn't say there's like a big mobile suit one-on-one battle. But yeah, it's mostly about a crew of characters who will die. I guess the only characters who live are Eri, obviously because she's going to be Suletta Mercury, and then her mom is still out there somewhere.
Yes. Yeah. And I like, as you say, it's not like a super action, big crazy action thing, but I like these sort of very methodical way in which it presents its action. Like if this is stylistically some of what it's going to do in the show, I like this approach of where it's very Gundam-y, right? It's not like big crazy giant beam clashes. It's not very flashy. It's more like it feels very practical and very heavy. You get that great moment where some sort of rival pilot guy, who I'm going to assume is going to be a major character in the show, who's the guy who has like on his mobile suit these pods or whatever that are able to shut down the gun system in the Gundams. And he does that to the Gundam that Soletta is piloting, or Samaya, I guess. She's not Soletta Mercury yet. That shuts down that Gundam, and then her dad comes in, shoots the pod, and then smacks him and starts flying away to get like distance. And there's like a real sense of like weight and momentum. And I think they get a lot of that good Gundam space feel, that comes across in the animation, that I think is a real like particular talent of, and like I think fixation for Gundam projects that I'm always happy to see. It was one of those things I remember really noting when I watched it the first time, was like, okay, good. There's still, I don't know if it is just every single person that comes to Sunrise to do Gundam, like knows how important like the zero G and the weightlessness and like the way that movement in space works, or if there's like a guy, a producer, someone at Sunrise who's like, I am the guy who goes in and says, no, if like this liquid spills and you're in a spaceship, it's going to be a little ball, and it's like, and no, that's not how it works. It's like, whatever it is, whoever is like responsible for this. I love the consistency of the sense of weightlessness and being in space. And I think it's particularly important here because of how much it's thematized around this is why the Gundams are being made, because they care about living in space long term. They care about like this being an environment that becomes habitable for humans, and using technology in order to do that. And so having the kind of otherworldly nature of this zero G movement. And there's a point where one like minor character has like a little, straw, with like tea in it or something. And then like a little bit leaks out, and then it drifts towards this other character who like opens their mouth and, like eats it basically, this little like floating ball of tea. And those little tiny moments, whether they're in the character stuff or you get a lot of it in the action that pays attention to the weightlessness, I think is important. And I'm happy to see that it is still here. So many years after 1979 original Mobile Suit Gundam, we are still consistently so good at depicting zero G space in Gundam shit.
I mean, there's that entire sequence in the middle where they're trying to have the little birthday party, and both of Aries' parents get pulled away by different things. Obviously, one of which is the death of all these people. But Aerie winds up going to the Gundam that is in the main hangar that they had been working on at the beginning of the episode, and she's floating out to go get it and kind of yelling at it, like, you're the reason my parents, keep going away. And it's kind of an adorable scene, but it's also very striking to just see the toddler who has grown up in this environment and knows it very well, just kind of freely navigating three-dimensional space that way. I really like things like that. It's actually something I think the first half of this prologue is very good at, is that, that center they are on, the space station where they are developing these Gundams, is a very lived-in little environment, even though we're only there for, 10 minutes before shit goes down, right? I just feel like you can feel relationships between the characters, you can feel a sense of history. It's why you feel uneasy, because while the bad guy of this episode, Delling Rembrandt, is saying stuff that frankly makes a lot of sense if you've watched other Gundam shows about like, nah, it's not good when the system is like fucking up the pilot, and you're like, yeah, I've seen other shows, it's not good. When you see the actual environment that all these scientists are working in, it feels like a family that is working together. Like the doctor is literally viewed as the grandmother to Aerie. Aerie calls her Baba and stuff like that. And I think there's a sense that, okay, there is something much more pure worth fighting for here. And what is being snuffed out is not nasty military experiments. It's an actual, like, kind of hopeful ideological project that these people are working on. And that's something that feels, that definitely, like, that's the kind of thing that I feel like is probably worth watching the prologue for the main series, less than any plot stuff, is that kind of ideological, thematic thing they're setting up.
Yeah, and then and there are like a lot of interesting things I think you can imagine that they'll be able to pick up in the show, because I can't imagine, that this dude organizes this whole raid of this base and all this stuff with the Gundams and comes away from it empty-handed outside of the political victory he's won. Like, I have to imagine that they're going to use their own fucking right. Like, I have to imagine that Dealing Rembrandt is a hypocrite. Like, that's got to be where this is eventually going to go. And I'm like curious to see like how some of those ideas are picked up, that like, this economic bloc and like Mobile Suit Development Council is not going to let all of that work go away, especially because you say like the thing that really they destroyed here wasn't the Gundam. What they destroyed was all like the ideological scientists that were trying to work on the good version of this project and had to make the weapons on top of it,
Yes, absolutely. Speaking of those weapons, my favorite touch on the mobile suits here, which generally look very good, I'm excited to see them in action more, but the the main Gundams all have this thing where their shield becomes the different like pods that they use telepathically, becomes the bits, and it like blows apart and it's the bits, and then it can come back and form the shield again. That is one of the coolest ideas in the history of Gundam. It looks so good in action. It's such a cool thing to have, and it makes so much sense because, hey, right now I need a shield, but right now I need bits. You can kind of go back and forth between them. I fucking loved that.
Yeah, it's really great. Yeah, and you have that like really great sequence where she like, you know, points out the like 1, 2, 3 on the screen or whatever, just like basically playing a game, and then the Gundam fucking its shield comes apart. It becomes these big metal bits that go flying and fuck all that stuff up, and then shoots that one dude. There's like a really good like there's a very satisfying mechanical nature with which a lot of that stuff is animated, and the clinking and clacking of the bits coming together and smashing into other mobile suits. It's a good idea.
Well, let's talk about that then, because we get our youngest Gundam pilot ever. I thought it would be Uso Evan for a long time, but nope. Now we have Eri, who's like 3 or 4. I think she's 4. Yeah, it's her birthday.
4.
She's turning 4.
She says 4 years old.
Says it on her birthday cake. She's 4 years old, and the whole thing that they are trying at the beginning of the episode, and they're talking about throughout, is they're trying to break through layer 33 in the system of the Gundam. And Eri winds up being able to do it, and her mother just watches in horror as her little girl keeps pointing, and everything is blowing up. And there is, I think, one of the bleakest fucking lines in Gundam history, which is, it all looks like candles on the birthday cake when all of these people are blowing up, and she is becoming a pretty effective killer.
Yes. The Gundam does most of the work for her. She just points it out. And yeah, all the stuff of the, it's a kind of an obvious metaphor, but I think it's a very effective one, of this being her birthday, because this is the day that she is born, right? That, where she, as a Gundam pilot or whatever, right? This is the end of whatever life she would have had. And now on this birthday, she is now a military pilot. She has killed people, whether she realizes it at this age yet or not. And that, her family, or her father, is killed, and she's left with her mother. And the whole world that she had is now gone, and she has to have a new life. That whole sequence, as all that comes together, it's really effective. I think it's one of the main things that makes this such a really strong one, like standalone piece of storytelling, is that it all of those pieces build together to this climax of the happy birthday song sung by her father. And, you've been setting up the birthday stuff throughout the early parts of the episode, and then it climaxing there as the happy family life collides with the politics and the violence of this military, like pseudo-military organization, resulting in, happy birthday to you, or, as the song, like getting to that very last point of the song, the dad getting killed, and then her having to sing the last line just to herself. There are a few things I could imagine that is more fucking like heartrending than that sequence.
It's phenomenal. It just immediately kind of takes its place in the Gundam canon among memorable deaths, because of course there's multiple layers to it. Of like, I really love how the husband and wife, Elnora and Nadim, just say "I love you" back and forth to each other. I stay. Mm-hmm. Like that is like, because they just like, she says it like she's out of breath, and then he says it with conviction, and then she's running away. Obviously, Eri doesn't realize what's going on, and so he starts singing "Happy Birthday." She starts singing it, and she finishes it on her own. And then, of course, just as you say, there's all the imagery of the candles and the explosions and all of this. And of course, she's in the mobile suit and has killed people, though obviously you would not say she is morally culpable for any of that. That's something she chose to do. Yeah, it's an incredible sequence. I don't know how you wouldn't immediately, watching this, be on board with the show, because as soon as you see it, it's like, okay, they have some kind of vision for this, because this is such a striking sequence. And I think when you think of the big Gundam deaths in the future, you're going to think of the dad who was singing "Happy Birthday" as he bum rushed this other mobile suit with his and slowly died.
Yes. Yeah, it's a really powerful sequence. And then you do get also like a great kiss-off line at the end of the episode of Delling Rembrandt getting to say, like, straight to camera, like, "To all Gundams, I deny you."
Yes.
Hite shimasu, and then it goes into the credits. It's very good.
Yeah, it actually cuts before he finishes the line, and the part where he says "I deny you" will be, it's over the title treatment, and it says Mobile Suit
Yes.
Gundam, The Witch from Mercury, coming soon or whatever. And then we go into the credits. It's very good. And, I think something I am so fascinated with this, Sean, is that so as you say, the prologue had huge reception in Japan, very well received.
Yeah.
Since it came out here I say here, but globally, it had its global launch on YouTube. Gundam has been trending on Twitter, trending pretty big, actually. It's trending because of this, and because, for whatever reason, people have rediscovered G Gundam. I don't know if you've seen this.
Gundam I keep on seeing memes about it. I'm like, what's happening?
From what I can tell, someone posted the scene where the main character pulls out the saber, and it does the thing from the theme song where it says G Gundam on it. And that's just such a great scene, and people were talking about, oh, G Gundam's so great. And people, just all the G Gundam fans came out of the woodwork, and I'm totally on board with that, because G Gundam slaps very hard, and we should all talk about how good it is. But there's been that, plus the Witch from Mercury thing. And I've just been thinking how, Gundam, Iron-Blooded Orphans was sort of at the beginning of the Crunchyroll era, where things were simulcast. I don't know if Iron-Blooded Orphans, though, was even like day and date simulcast the way stuff is now. It might have been on a slight delay. Because a lot of stuff was back then in like 2015. But now everything is, this is going to be the first of these, mainline AU shows. There were obviously the build shows separately. And I'm just very curious how big this is going to be outside of Japan, because it's been a while since we've had a comparable case. Anime has just gotten bigger across the board. I think Gundam has had more visibility, and I feel like this prologue immediately built up a lot of hype, and it's going to be more easily accessible than ever. So I think sky's the limit.
Yeah, I definitely feel like a lot of good energy. People are interested in Gundam. I think it's probably disconnected from this prologue, but I did catch a student in class the other day who was watching an episode of Iron-Blooded Orphans on his phone when he was supposed to be doing his work.
Did you just let him keep watching?
No, but I did say, like, hey, that's very... I looked at this like, oh, season 2, episode 19, you're getting very close to the end. He looked up at me like, what? I know it's only 24 episodes. Like, I haven't told them that I am the co-host of an anime podcast, but they all know that I'm into anime, so...
Oh, okay.
But, yeah.
See, this is why I've got to get you these the Japanimation Station business cards that we've joked about, so that when you see your student watching that, you say, oh, hey, season 2, episode 24. It's like, what? And you just slide him the business card and be like, get back to reading, kid. All right. I mean, it's also, this upcoming anime season is fucking stacked. It's starting in October. We've got Spy Family returning. We have Witch from Mercury. We have the Chainsaw Man anime. There's just a lot of big ones that are, like, I think going to be very high profile, and I think this will clearly be one of the standouts of those.
Yeah. I mean, I'm super excited for it. Because I also think, like, we didn't really talk about this side of it, but this prologue also is just, like, a great production. Like, it looks awesome. Yeah. The music is great. I mean, I don't want to extrapolate and just assume that means that the TV show is always going to be to this quality, because I do not know if they, like, had much sort of, like, a lot more time to work on this prologue or not. But... based on the trailers and based on this prologue, like, it just looks gorgeous. The use of colors is fantastic. It definitely feels like Ufotable's sort of aesthetic has been an influence here, because I think, like, a lot of, like, the way the characters look in anime feels a little bit like it's particularly less like Kimetsu no Yaiba and a little bit more like the Fate stuff. It feels like they're kind of pulling some of that stylistic things there. And it's like a very modern looking production. Because it's been a while since we had, like, a big premiere Gundam show. It's been 2015, 2016 since Iron-Blooded Orphans, and the aesthetics of anime have obviously, like, grown in the past, like, 5 to 6 years, and this feels like it's on that kind of cutting edge and is very kind of with all that kind of, like, the trendy stuff of what anime is doing aesthetically right now, and it's, like, right there with its peers, and that's very cool to see Gundam, like, having said, it's like Double O was the same way, right? When Double O, we look at that as a 2008 anime, it's like, man, this thing was, like, really on the cutting edge of how anime was presented in 2008, and this feels like this is, like, right there with that kind of element.
Yeah, obviously we'll have to see more, but definitely there's also the G-Reco influences are very clear. And G-Reco was just so ahead of its time when you look at its animation, because kind of everything has trended in that direction of having the heavier lines, the brighter, bolder colors, the bigger range of colors, the more sort of handcrafted style. And I think you have a little bit of that in the character designs, definitely in the mobile suits. I think the Ufotable connection is absolutely right. We'll see when they get to, like, bigger action sequences and stuff, if some of that comes in as well. This episode does not have a ton of CG in it. There's a little bit here and there, but it is mostly traditional. But yeah, I'm psyched. It looks good. The music is good. I'm excited to hear more of that. Yeah. And should we just fill the people in on how we're going to be covering it? Because we haven't exactly decided yet, but I do just want people to know it's not going to be one episode at a time every week.
No.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's just like so antithetical to think how we like approach media analysis. It would just be it would be impossible to try to do this one episode at a time.
Yeah. And you don't like watching anime like that, so...
No, yeah, I would be able to do it if we decided to do it for a podcast, but I just don't think it doesn't fit in the spirit, I think, of what we do for Weekly Suit Gundam, which is ironic because we call it Weekly Suit Gundam, and it's just not a weekly show. It's very much just less of a weekly show now than it ever was. But we will be covering it, obviously, at least, I don't know if they have announced whether or not it is a, like, 2 seasons thing like 00 and Iron Blooded Orphans. I imagine if it is a 26 episode thing and then there's a season break, we'll hit that like 26 episode chunk, and then when the season comes back we'll do that, or it might just be 26 episodes and that's the whole show, like one of the builds or G-Reco. They haven't announced that yet, but that will be how we're covering it, as like a whole production, similar to how we've covered anything else for Weekly Suit Gundam.
Yeah, so I think we'll probably cover it that way. There's plenty of other stuff going. That's the other thing, is that of course if we were doing this every single week we wouldn't be able to cover any other anime, and we've got lots of other stuff we want to talk about. So yeah, we will cover Witch from Mercury when we've all seen Witch from Mercury, at the end of the season, at the end of the core, something like that. And I'm psyched. I probably will watch it week to week because I do enjoy watching stuff like that. So you can follow me on Twitter if you want some initial thoughts, but I will try not to spoil it or anything because of course
I'll have to block you on Twitter or some shit if you started tweeting Witch from Mercury spoilers.
I'll just tweet every week which different kid's song they sing while someone dies, because I assume that's going to be a regular part of it. You know, the scene where they go, "Old MacDonald had a farm." It's going to be great.
London Bridge is falling. Or wait, no. You've got me doing Old MacDonald melody to London Bridge because I cannot now cross that.
London Bridge is falling down.
Yes,
falling down. Falling down.
Two musical wires got crossed in my brain, and I was like, I no longer know the melody to London Bridge. It has now become Old MacDonald. But yes.
This is if
that's the only thing you tweet. If that's the only thing you tweet about Witch from Mercury, even if that's not actually a thing they do in the show, I will accept that.
Maybe I'll just do that as a trick on Sean. I will say every week I will come up with a new kids song that they are doing and try to convince Sean that that's what they're doing. But it probably won't.
It's crazy that in this episode, Soletta Mercury's evil twin, Soletta Venus, showed up and stole her boyfriend to the homecoming dance.
All right, we're getting loopy here. We've been recording for a while. Witch from Mercury is starting October 2nd alongside the new season of anime. Very excited for it. We'll see you guys soon. Next week on Japanimation Station, we are talking about Full Metal Alchemist Brotherhood, the first half of that series. So Japanimation Station is going full steam ahead. A lot of good stuff to come. And soon it will be Gundam time once again.
Yes, for now the Gundam must rest and we must go to Alchemist territory. But soon the Gundam will come once more.